We say fight back!
Over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You could sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, we're reading from Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do by Jennifer L. Eberhardt, Ph.D. This is from the introduction. She starts out by talking about how she's giving a talk to a group of police officers and chiefs of police about bias, and they're all sitting in stone-faced, cold, kind of glaring at her. And she continues, eventually I stopped with the lessons and the data graphs and the images and the jokes and the movie clips, none of which were working. She was not getting no response from the audience. And she says, I decided to veer off my usual script and share a personal story. I explained that some years ago, my son Everett and I were on a plane. He was 5 years old, wide-eyed, and trying to take it all in. He looked around and saw a black passenger. He said, hey, that guy looks like Daddy. I looked at the man, and truth be told, he did not look anything like Daddy, not in any way. I looked around for anyone else Everett might be referring to, but there was only one black man on the plane. I couldn't help but be struck by the irony. The race researcher having to explain to her own black child that not all black people look alike. But then I paused and thought about the fact that kids see the world differently from adults. Maybe Everett was seeing something that I missed. I decided to take another look. I checked the guy's height. No resemblance there. He was several inches shorter than my husband. I studied his face. There was nothing in his features that looked familiar. I looked at his skin color. No similarity there either. Then I took a look at his hair. This man had dreadlocks flowing down his back, and Everett's father is bald. I gathered my thoughts and turned to my son, prepared to lecture him in the way I might inform an unobservant student in my class. But before I could begin, he looked up at me and said, I hope that man doesn't rob the plane. Maybe I didn't get that right. What did you say? I asked him, wishing I had not heard what I had heard. And he said it again, as innocently and as sweetly as you can imagine from a bright-eyed boy trying to understand the world. I hope he doesn't rob the plane. I was on the brink of being upset. Why would you say that? I asked as gently as I could. You know, Daddy wouldn't rob a plane. Yes, he said, I know. Well, why did you say that? This time my voice dropped an octave and turned sharp. Everett looked up at me with a really sad face and said very solemnly, I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I was thinking that. Just telling that story reminded me of how much that moment hurt. I took a deep breath, and when I looked back out at the crowd in the auditorium, I saw that the expressions had softened. Their eyes had changed. They were no longer uniformed police officers, and I was no longer a university researcher. We were parents, unable to protect our children from a world that is often bewildering and frightening, a world that influences them so profoundly, so insidiously, and so unconsciously that they and we don't know why we think the way we do. With a heavy heart, I continued with my point. We are living with such severe racial stratification that even a 5-year-old can tell us what's supposed to happen next. Even with no malice, Even with no hatred, the Black Crime Association made its way into the mind of my 5-year-old son, into all of our children, into all of us. I finished the training and invited the audience to come up to ask questions or share their stories. I'd been warned that no one would, but one officer did stay behind in the emptying auditorium. As he approached the stage, I stepped down to meet him. Your story about your son on the plane reminded me of an experience I had on the street. It's something I haven't thought about in a long time, the officer said. I was out one day working undercover, the officer said, and I saw a guy at a distance who didn't look right. This guy looked similar to me, you know, black, same build, same height. But this guy had a scruffy beard, unkempt hair, ripped clothes, and he looked like he was up to no good. The guy began approaching me, and as he was getting closer, I had a feeling that he had a gun on him. Something's off with this guy, I thought. This dude ain't right. So the guy is coming down a hill near the front of a nice office building, one of those big office towers with glass walls, and as the guy's approaching, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was armed and dangerous. As I got closer to the building, I lost him for a second, and I began to feel panicked. Suddenly, I see the guy again, but this time he's inside the office building. I could see the guy clearly through the glass wall. He's walking inside the building in the same direction and at the same pace I was walking. Something was wrong. When I quickened my pace, I could see him quicken his pace. And finally, I decided to stop abruptly, turn, and confront the guy. He stops too, and I look him face to face, the officer said to me. And when I looked in his eyes, a shock went through me. I realized that I was staring at myself. I was the person I feared. I was staring at my own reflection through the mirrored wall. That entire time, I was tailing myself. I was profiling myself. The stories kept coming. At every single session, someone came up and told me a story, stories that enriched my understanding not only of police-community relations, but also of our human predicament. This book is an examination of implicit bias, what it is, where it comes from, how it affects us, and how we can address it. Implicit bias is not a new way of calling someone a racist. In fact, you don't have to be a racist at all to be influenced by it. Implicit bias is a kind of distorting lens that's a product of both the architecture of our brain and the disparity in our society. We all have ideas about race, even the most open-minded among us. Those ideas have the power to bias our perception, our attention, our memory, and our actions, all despite our conscious awareness or deliberate intentions. Our ideas about race are shaped by the stereotypes to which we're exposed on a daily basis. And one of the strongest stereotypes in American society associates blacks with criminality. And she continues. The word in the book is Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhardt. That's great.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, TGIF, whatever it may be for you. Happy Friday. And it is Anything Goes Friday. So if there's anything on your mind, any topics you'd like to talk about, our telephone number is 202-808-9925. And we will be taking your calls on, you know, pretty much whatever's on the top of your mind. I wanted to just share with you my thoughts on what looks like is going to be coming probably at the end of the day today or sometime next week, although it could take several weeks because Bob Barr is in the middle of the process. Or excuse me, Bill Barr. I keep thinking of, you know, my old congressman from Atlanta, Bob Barr, who I met at Manny Malouf's tavern a couple of times, and he was a crazed Republican. In fact, he's still out there being a crazed Republican, but he was also, you know, a nice guy to have a beer with. But in any case, Bill Barr is the Attorney General. He was the Attorney General who in 1992 advised George Herbert Walker Bush to cover up the Iran-Contra crimes of Reagan and Bush and shut down the investigation by Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh at that time. And the way he shut down those investigations was by pardoning Caspar Weinberger and Ollie North and Elliot Abrams and a couple of other people whose names are kind of lost to the obscurity of time. And you know, I've been predicting. I wrote an op-ed a month or two ago saying, you know, he did it before for the Republicans. Bill Barr is a guy who knows how to cover up crimes for Republicans. That's what he does for a living. I mean, you know, he went from that into private law practice, helping out people with their crimes. And you know, now he's the Attorney General again. And so Mueller works for him. And the State Department, the Department of Justice guidelines that were developed under the administrations of two different presidents who were both facing the possibility of impeachment or indictment because they had both committed crimes. The Justice Department guidelines that were developed by those attorneys general in those two White Houses, those guidelines say you can't indict a sitting president. And Bob Mueller is the kind of guy, he was, a Marine, and, you tell him this is the way it is, and he says, sir, yes, sir. You tell him take that hill, and he takes that hill. You tell him you can't climb that hill, he doesn't climb that hill. I mean, it's just that simple. And so Mueller has said that he's going to operate within the guidelines of the Justice Department, as has Bill Barr. But Bill Barr took it a step beyond that. Now, if the Justice Department guidelines say you can't indict a sitting president, and Mueller found crimes by Trump that are worthy of indictment, he nonetheless will not indict, because that's what the Justice Department guidelines say from two previous presidents who had committed crimes. So if he doesn't indict, this is where it gets real interesting. What Bill Barr has said, our Attorney General, is that if there's no indictment, if somebody's not criminally charged, and he said this in general, right? So when he said it, I think a lot of people thought, oh, he's talking about people like George Papadopoulos, or not even literally George, because he got busted, but, maybe Hope Hicks, somebody who got involved in this thing, got caught up in it, maybe is on the edge of getting in trouble, but we decided that what they did isn't all that bad, so we're not going to indict them. And so what Bill Barr said is, if somebody isn't indicted, I'm not going to release the information on that person. It wouldn't be right. Right? If Hope Hicks made some bad decisions, but they weren't actually crimes, why smear her name in public by talking about the part of the Mueller report that refers to Hope Hicks? And I think everybody, is going, yeah, well, that makes a certain amount of sense. If she's not being, if you can't prove that she committed a crime, then, why should you go out and talk about what she did? Which is fine logic for everybody except Trump. But Bill Barr has said he intends to apply that logic to Trump. He said it in his confirmation hearings. So if Donald Trump is not indicted, which he won't be, even if there's proof that he colluded with Russia, if he's not indicted, then the information about Donald Trump will not be transmitted to Congress or the American people by the Attorney General. It will be redacted. It'll be deep-sixed. I think we can predict that right now, which means that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump are going to be all over the media next week and all the way to 2018 saying, see, no indictment, no information, nothing to see here. This was a witch hunt. There's nothing going on. Because Bill Barr will have used this kind of, I wouldn't call it a technicality in the law, but I think a terrible failure of two previous presidential administrations, both of which had guys in the White House who could have been indicted for crimes, where the Attorney General ordered the lawyers in the DOJ to come up with guidelines for the DOJ about whether they could prosecute a sitting president. In both cases, they said, we don't think it's a good idea. In neither case did they say it's impossible or illegal or unconstitutional. They just said it's not a good idea because the president is so busy being president that he shouldn't be distracted by a criminal trial. Wait until after he's out of office. And then we get into all these issues about statutes of limitation. Most crimes have statutes of limitations associated with them. Murder is one of the few that doesn't. But most crimes do, and, there's a lot of speculation that some of Trump's crimes, certainly, particularly his financial crimes, which typically have a 10-year statute of limitations, that those crimes will have run out at the end of this presidential term and certainly would run out if he's in office until 2024, as he's pushing 80 years old. So I'm telling you, get ready. Get ready for Trump and Fox to be running victory laps. Now, this is you know, you could say this is the worst case scenario. I think this is the most probable scenario, frankly. And I've been saying this for months, by the way. Go back and read my op-ed about William Barr and exactly what he intended to do. So, you know, I'll toss that on the table for you. There's a whole bunch of other little interesting little news stories out there that, particularly Fox News' obsession with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that we'll get to as we go through the program. But, you know, it is Anything Goes Friday, so let's pick up your phone calls here. David in Oceanside, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I called you a couple of weeks ago. I have this 980 work schedule where I get every other Friday off. So every other Friday you seem to get a phone call from me.
Thank you, David.
I called you about my views on climate change and, you know, how I don't believe in climate change. I understand the science. And I didn't get to finish that point because the music cut me off.
Okay.
So what I think people really need to understand, to be educated on, and I think you may actually, you know, you say you're a pilot, you may be familiar with this, the difference between energy and power. Take a gallon of gasoline, that's energy. That's energy stored in the chemical bonds of the hydrocarbons, the carbon and the hydrogen atoms. Mix it with oxygen, it burns, and you get power out of it. Now, that gallon of gasoline represents solar energy that was collected, you know, millions of years ago on an acre of swampland being hit by solar energy for days or weeks or months,
right?
However many, and that gets distilled and concentrated down to that 1 gallon of gasoline.
Correct.
The point is that, you know, all these alternatives, wind, solar, are great, but people have to realize that there's still a limit to the amount of power it can put out. You have rooftops panels all over Germany, and it's shutting down their coal plants. Great thing. But when we start electrifying all the vehicles, we're going to actually have to start taking acreage that is not dedicated to, you know, human occupation and start covering that with solar cells, like the Chinese have actually started to do.
Right. They're running solar panels along the sides of their roads on the medians that are strong enough that if you occasionally pull a car over, you know, because it breaks down, they won't break. But they're not strong enough that you could use them for a road surface. But they make a great, you know, what's that called, shoulder for the roads.
Yeah, and the biggest point I want to make is that, you know, you have these hucksters out there. I saw one where you clip this thing on the hood of your car, hook it on the fuel manifold, and you can put water in your gas tank and it'll run your car. Of course, this is hokum. It just doesn't work like that.
Right. Well, it might work like that if you had a hydrogen fuel cell and a giant battery to do the electrolysis on the water, but otherwise, no, you're right.
Right, and the guy buys this thing and says, "Oh my God, science lied to me. It must be climate change must be a hoax."
Right.
And so this is why I'm thinking, you know, the education is key, because if people just blindly believe in climate change because they're a Democrat, they can be flipped, and we need to get people to understand that.
Yeah, there is, you know, yes, there is actual science here. And, you know, at the risk of scaring the hell out of everybody, and you too, David, I encourage people to check out arctic-news.blogspot.com. It's a website where a lot of climate scientists will share their darkest thoughts. David, thank you for the call.
Latent heat of fusion.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we've got that fusion reactor just 93 million miles away from us that sends us a lot of power. David, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 17 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls on whatever you'd like to talk about today. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gary, listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
You spoke briefly about a week ago about the evangelicals supporting Trump because of the whole King Cyrus thing, right?
Well, it's the other way around. They were supporting Trump because he promised to keep intact the tax exemption for churches, even if they engaged in political activity. And the big mega churches guys love that. And then And so then they came up with King Cyrus as the rationalization for why they could be supportive of a guy as corrupt as Trump.
You're mistaken in that, Tom. There were evangelicals, quote unquote, prophesying that Trump would be the modern day King Cyrus before the election.
Right.
They've been saying this for years.
No, I get that, but it's just a justification.
Hey, please let me finish my thought.
Sure.
You said something about Cyrus having supported Muhammad. That's got the history.
That's wrong. You're absolutely right. Cyrus was before Muhammad was even.
A millennium before. Yeah, a millennium before Muhammad.
Yeah.
What Cyrus was the emperor of Persia, modern day Iran. He conquered Babylon. The Hebrews were being held in slavery in Babylon. Cyrus conquered Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, released the Hebrews, allowed them to return to Palestine, and implemented the building of the second temple, the Babylonians having destroyed the original temple. And then that was the temple. The second temple was the temple that was still in existence when Jesus was alive.
Right.
And that temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE or AD, whatever you want to say.
Right.
Now, the modern day evangelicals, and I belonged to, for a few years in the 70s, I belonged to a charismatic church in Florida. I learned about
I did too in Michigan. I was a member of the North Lansing Church of God.
Okay. Now, they are expecting the return of Christ any day now. However, before that can happen, according to their understanding of the Bible, is that the temple has to be rebuilt. And it has to be built on the Temple Mount,
right,
where the rock is currently.
Right, which is why Alan Goodman did what he did.
And then there has to be the Battle of Armageddon.
Yep.
Many of them believe that the Battle of Armageddon is going to be a nuclear war.
Yep.
So Trump comes along, and they, like I say, before he was even considering running for president, they were saying he's going to be the new King Cyrus.
Gary, got 30 seconds.
Yeah. So they believe he's going to implement the rebuilding of the temple and the bringing on Armageddon nuclear war so that Jesus can return.
Right.
Trump, who knows what he really believes, but Pence is a Reconstructionist. He believes that stuff.
Yeah, and so does Pompeo.
Yes. And they believe the only law that they're beholden to is their interpretation of Mosaic law. The human law is meaningless.
Right, and Revelations, yeah.
Yes.
So your point, Gary, real quick?
They're very dangerous people, and we have to be aware that this is their agenda.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. Gary, thank you, and thanks for correcting my Cyrus and Muhammad thing, because I figured out about a half hour after I got off the air, and somebody corrected me on Twitter, and I thought, oh, yeah, of course. I mean, you know, Muhammad was long after the Old Testament era, as it were. Gary, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Apropos of my opening rant, if I was, if we were doing a normal day and I was saying, okay, here's the question for the day, it's how should we react? How can the Democratic Party best react? How could we as Democrats best react, or as progressives, when Trump and Fox News and right-wing hate radio all proclaim victory? If that's how this plays out, which is fully what I'm expecting. Marcia in Englewood, Florida. Hey, Marcia, you wanted to talk about bankruptcy?
Hey, Tom. Good morning to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was cleaning house or something, and I always have free speech on. And when I turned off the vacuum cleaner, I heard looked like a documentary of a bunch of Spanish-speaking only restaurant workers, and I think it was in Los Angeles, where they were saying that they hadn't been paid by their employers for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. One of them was behind to the tune of $61,000 of his employer withholding his salary. What was happening is the restaurant owners, when they owed so much money to their employees, were filing for bankruptcy.
Right. This is
Not
a common
that they didn't have,
businesses commonly do this, Marcia.
to me, somebody's got to start looking at these bankruptcy laws, because what it looks like is a get out of jail free card for any thief that owns a business that doesn't want, like Donald Trump, that doesn't want to pay his workers, doesn't want to pay his contractors, doesn't want to pay anybody, has the money, has the resources to pay them, just doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree, Marcia. And if you go back 30, 40, 50 years, what you'd find is the bankruptcy laws had a whole bunch of exceptions where people couldn't, bail out of, if a person, we're talking corporate bankruptcy here, where if a corporation went into bankruptcy, before they sold off and distributed the assets in the general market, or after they did that once the money was there, they had to pay off the pensions of any of the workers. They had to pay off the salaries of the workers. I mean, there was a whole bunch of specific stuff that had to do with labor law and bankruptcy law that first of all, I should toss in the caveat here. I'm no expert on bankruptcy law, but I've never gone through a business bankruptcy, but my understanding is that in the 80s or 90s, and then again in 2005 in the bankruptcy legislation that basically Joe Biden pushed through, the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005, that in both those cases, a lot of those requirements that employers honor pension funds and things like that were just blown up, which is one of the reasons why after the Reagan era, a number of airlines, they were the most famous ones, Eastern and TWA, as I recall. Maybe not Eastern, but certainly TWA, and Pan Am, I think, was the other one, where when they went through bankruptcy, they were also able to basically screw the pensioners, just to take the pension money or, whatever. It went from being a liability to being an asset, and thus it could be distributed. And I agree with you. I think we need serious reform of our bankruptcy laws. And we need to undo the provision that was written into that 2005 legislation at the request of the banksters, probably in Delaware. We need to undo the provision that says that you may not declare bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy, on student debt, because that's just crazy and just wrong. So, Marcia, thanks for calling. Mark in Las Vegas. Hey, Mark, we got a minute to the break. A quick one on electric vehicles here.
Yes.
What's
there
up?
we go. I took off speakerphone. Yeah, I heard the gentleman call in earlier about basically talking about how gasoline concentrates much more energy than the sun does. And while that's true, it neglects a couple of simpler things. Our car, we have a Tesla Model 3, which we love, goes much farther per unit of energy than a gasoline car ever could.
Yes.
So we use
because it's much more efficient
energy.
Yeah, the same thing with my Prius hybrid plug-in. It's when I'm just running on electricity, it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And your plug-in and any electric vehicle has one essential feature that an internal combustion engine car can never match, and that is we get cleaner over time as the grid cleans up.
Yes.
And regular cars pollute for hundreds of years.
Yes. Yeah, and they get dirtier over time, too, as the rings start going. Mark, excellent. Yep. Thank you very much. And I got to tell you, I am so loving this plug-in hybrid. I have not used electricity in a long, long time. Gasoline, excuse me.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I have not driven using anything except electricity for a long, long time. Oh, my. It's Friday, you can tell. We'll be right back. The Women's Suffrage Movement, edited by Sally Roche Wagner. It is a collection of essays by a whole variety of people, from Gloria Steinem to onward. This is from the foreword. With the women's suffrage movement, Sally Roche Wagner has given us a unique gift, the real words and actions, writings and debates of white and black women who fought for over a century to gain an identity as free human beings and citizens. For most of those years, black women were legally owned as chattel, forced to work and to suffer the unique punishment of giving birth to children who were also enslaved. White women were not as restricted and endangered as African women or men, but as the daughters and wives of white men, they were also legal chattel with no right to leave their homes, disobey orders, profit from their own work, speak in public, have custody of their own children, own property without a guardian, or affect the patriarchal laws that governed their lives. Even many white men who fought against slavery supported the subordinate position of their wives and daughters. When Susan B. Anthony, an abolitionist and a suffragist, sheltered not only runaway slaves, but white wives escaping violent husbands, male abolitionist allies warned her that she was going too far. As Frederick Douglass, a freed slave abolitionist and suffragist himself, wrote in his autobiography, "When the true history of the anti-slavery cause shall be written, women will occupy a large space in its pages, for the cause of the slave has been peculiarly women's cause." And this despite the fact that many white women, especially not only in the South, aided and abetted black slavery and accepted their own subordinate position as natural. A century later, Gunnar Myrdal would explain in his landmark study of slavery that enslaved African women and men brought to these shores had been given the legal status of wives as the nearest and most natural analogy to the status of slaves. As he added, quote, "The parallel between women and Negroes is the deepest truth of American life, for together they form the unpaid or underpaid labor on which America runs," end quote. Wagner takes us into the rooms, writings, and discussions where white and black women and black men, all fighting for legal personhood and full citizenship, were both a miracle of shared purpose, despite all the lethal forces keeping them apart, and a tragedy of division that echoes in the need for intersectionality and inclusion in this day. Even the lynching of black men, crimes designed to maintain the racial order after the Civil War, was most often justified by proximity to white women, however imaginary or freely chosen. This tells us how dangerous and brave was the coalition for universal adult suffrage that you will read about here. It also reveals the betrayal when white men split the coalition apart by offering the vote to black men first, only to then limit their votes with poll taxes, impossible literacy tests, and violence. Yet despite this tragic division, and despite being labeled as varying degrees of non-human, this fractious rebellion and fragile coalition did eventually succeed in gaining citizenship for the majority of people in this country. Wagner brings us these imperfect and hopeful rebellions of the past as they happened, complete with divisions and debates, and a long organizational disagreement among suffragists about whether to seek the vote by federal amendment or state by state. She doesn't attempt to prove a thesis or to explain mistakes or to excuse destructive divisions. Other than the first and last chapters, each one with a very specific purpose, she doesn't insert herself at all. Instead, she allows us to witness the words and acts, dreams and disappointments, victories and defeats, visionary ideas and tactical errors of people fighting a battle that laid the basis for our continuing movement against hierarchies based on race and gender. It is this faithfulness to the past that allows us to learn lessons for changes in the present. In 30 years or so, this will no longer be a majority white country. It will better reflect the diversity that has always been its strength and its promise. Indeed, the first generation that is majority babies of color has already been born, and public opinion polls already show that the majority of Americans no longer support divisions by race or by gender. Yet there is also a lethal backlash from about a third of the country, including over half of white married women, often those without a college education, who want to preserve their unearned place in the social and economic hierarchy. That's why these victories and defeats of the past become the best possible lessons and warnings for our present and future. By taking us into the rooms where history happened, Wagner allows us to see the parallels and differences, empathy and estrangements, connections and isolations that can hinder or help our goals now. Almost none of the people we will meet in these pages will live to celebrate the changes they are working for. This should tell us that social justice movements are not a temporary part of our lives. They are our lives. Most of the activists here were not sure that slavery would be abolished or that universal adult suffrage would ever succeed. This should give us humility about what we can predict and also arm us with faith and patience. Few guessed that the legal right to vote would come a half-century later for white and black women than for black men, but would be mostly on paper. In the South, where most black Americans live, it would take another century plus an entire civil rights movement to overcome procedural and sometimes lethal barriers to voting. This should make us skeptical about changes that come from the top and that divide us more than empower us. And there are other lessons, and it continues, the women's suffrage movement.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oliver in New York City. Hey, Oliver, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. I'll make this very brief. Two things. There's an article published in The Intercept by Glenn Greenwald, and it has videotapes of what they're saying in that article. That, remember, the Trump administration blamed Maduro for burning up those aid trucks on the bridge?
Yeah, that's been completely discredited. It's a lie.
Yeah, because the video shows that it's the opposition.
That's correct.
Who threw Molotov cocktails on those trucks and burned them all up.
You're right. And it's outside of Amy Goodman, it's been completely absent from American media reporting.
Yes, yes. Now, the other thing I wanted to say very briefly, I listened to a federal prosecutor who used to work for the, the New York State.
Yeah, there's two districts in New York, Southern and Northern, so it would have been one of those two. Southern is principally New York City. Northern is everything else.
Right. He was a former prosecutor for the Southern District.
Right.
He said in an interview that the Justice Department only has a policy that a sitting president can't be indicted.
You're correct. It is not a law. It's not a rule even. It's just a policy. But Mueller has said he will respect that policy, and Bill Barr has said he will follow that policy. So we are SOL.
But the law on the books for the government, the whole federal government, says that he can be indicted if he committed crimes.
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay, that's all I wanted to add to.
Okay, well, that's what, this is what that was my opening rant, Oliver, is that we need to get ready for the fact that Bill Barr is, the Attorney General, and Trump are going to use, and frankly Mueller as well, are going to use a policy that was developed by two different presidents, twice now, two different White Houses have had their Justice Departments examine whether or not it's appropriate to indict a sitting president for a crime. And in both cases, they said, no, he's too busy. And they're, to being president. And it would be a danger to the nation if the president was distracted from being president. Well, now we've got a president who spends 6 hours a day watching TV and tweeting, and who has spent more time on the golf course in his 2 years in office than any other president did in their lifetimes, I think. And we're going to use a policy designed to protect his time because he's so busy. It's like it doesn't make any sense. The policy is wrong, but they're going to use it, and Trump is going to claim victory, and we better damn well get ready for that, because that's coming, and that's going to be the thing that he's going to try to ride to victory and re-election in 2020, and it's damn near possible. Oliver, thank you for the call. JT in Austin, Texas. Hey, JT, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Hey, I just want to throw this out there, and I don't know the answer, but regarding North Korea, my understanding is the United States is still technically at war with North Korea?
That's correct.
Okay, so you have Trump, and he's basically acting like a public relations firm for Kim Jong-un.
Well, he was. I mean, we just slapped some new sanctions on North Korea, and as a consequence of that, North Korea just pulled out of this, joint kind of conversation with South Korea program that they had going, which is causing South Korean President Moon no end of hand-wringing. But you continue wherever you were going with that.
Well, that may be, but Trump tweeted that North Korea was no longer a nuclear threat? I mean, that was clearly a lie. He said he trusts Kim Jong-un. He says he believes him regarding the barbaric torture of Otto Warmbier, a U.S. citizen.
Correct.
He halted the military exercises, readiness exercises with South Korea, and he says he believed Putin regarding North Korea's nuclear missile capability.
Instead of his own intelligence agencies, yes.
Yeah, and my understanding is that Russia has a defense industry cooperation agreement with North Korea. So where I'm going with this,
and they share a border with North Korea, by the way.
Yeah, but they help supply their military. So under the constitutional definition of treason, and I don't know the answer to this, it says giving aid and comfort to the enemy
at time of war. And during time of war.
Well, but we're in a state of war with North Korea, are we not?
We are.
There may be a ceasefire, but we're still technically in a state of war. And Kim Jong-un's stature has been raised dramatically on the world stage. And Putin...
So JT, you're suggesting, I've never heard this argument made before, but it makes perfect sense, that because we are at war with North Korea, that's the one place in the world where Trump could be giving aid and comfort to another government, and it would be during times of war.
Not an enemy.
Yeah, and so therefore it would qualify as actual treason. Yeah.
Yes, and lastly, but saying he believes Putin, who is the key ally of Kim Jong-un, according to North Korean media.
Yeah. But Russia, we are not at war with Russia right now. So, giving aid and comfort to Russia might be bad politics, and it might be a violation of a whole bunch of other laws, but it's not treason by the definition that is generally accepted, which has to do with times of war.
But Kim Jong-un is an enemy.
But with Kim, you're absolutely right, and I don't know how I overlooked that this last year or so, because Trump is giving aid and comfort to the enemy. I mean, this would be like Franklin Roosevelt during World War II saying, "Well, Hitler's not such a bad guy."
I'm in love with Hitler. I mean, can you imagine? What if Harry Truman? I'm in love with North Korea. I mean,
yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And you're absolutely right. And if the tables were turned, if a Democratic president had been doing this with Kim, the Republicans would be trying to have him charged with treason right now, using your logic, JT.
Would. I mean, the Democrats would charge him with treason.
Oh, they would join the Republicans, but the Republicans would they'd be at the front of the parade. And, their outrage is extraordinarily selective. JT, thanks for that. Thank you. Brilliant. Denise in Seattle. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Hello. How are you?
I'm great. What's up?
Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this program always makes me think so much, but the thing I called about was actually when Beto announced that he was running for president, I was actually hoping that that's who Bernie would pick or Stacey. Mm-hmm. And I think having that knowledge to begin with is really valid. And so the discussion yesterday was so interesting to me about the whole the man who won in Mexico and how he had his whole cabinet and everything. I think that's a wonderful idea. And as far as what Dems need to do, what happened to impeaching him?
Impeaching Trump?
Yes.
The Democrats have been engaging in magical thinking, frankly. They've been hoping that Robert Mueller is going to find that Donald Trump actually colluded with Russia, went to Russia, said, yeah, hey, you make me president and I'll drop the sanctions. And I'm guessing that there actually isn't evidence of that. I'm guessing that that's essentially what happened. But Trump had been basically saying from the get-go that he was in favor of dropping the sanctions because, and therefore Russia would, of course, come in and do whatever they can to help him get elected that they perceived they could either A, get away with, or B, might be within the law. And it just makes sense, and it doesn't require collusion for that to happen. And I think, frankly, that's what did happen. That Trump got a little help from his friends,
Right. That investigation aside, there's so many things that they could treason, that they could how do you say that word? Emoluments clause.
Yeah.
All of the things. There's things that can be done. Why isn't it?
The Democrats have been keeping their powder dry until the Mueller report comes out. I think the Mueller report's going to come out, and Trump is going to claim that it's vindication. And as a consequence of, claiming that it's vindication, it's going to be a whole lot harder now, as a consequence of that, for Democrats to pursue impeachment based on the crimes that we already know about, like the campaign finance crimes, where he paid off Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. And therefore, and this was the week after the Access Hollywood tape was made public. So had the Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels story come out that following week, which Trump prevented by, $260,000 worth of hush money payments, had those stories come out, I seriously doubt he'd be in the White House right now. So even setting aside Russia, you can build a case that Trump broke the law in a way that changed the outcome of an election, and therefore he is an illegitimate president. But the problem is
all the money he gets from the presidency. It's just like so.
Oh yeah,
like
that's going. That's the emoluments thing is a separate thing. But you're absolutely right on that too. The problem is that it's going to be really hard now for the Democrats to gin up enough outrage about this to produce an impeachment because it's been in the public so long.
Oh. Yeah,
and people are going to be like, well, you weren't upset about it a month ago. Why are you upset about it now? That's how Trump and his buddies are going to play this, Denise. And that's, I may be wrong, and I hope I am, and I hope that Mueller comes out and says, okay, here's what he did, and bang, and it's right off to impeachment. But I'm, particularly given that Bill Barr, who is an expert at covering up Republican crimes, this is what he has been doing for a living for 40 years, on and off, and certainly did during the George H.W. Bush administration. It's going to be tough. Denise, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Talk media for the rest of us, the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Steve in Zimmerman, Minnesota. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I was wondering if you could help me out with this rumor I'd heard regarding the 2 Boeing airplanes that crashed.
Right. Sure.
The story I'm getting is that part of the reason those 2 planes had not received their software updates was directly impacted by a recent government shutdown.
Yes and no. Boeing is working on a software update to fix the MAX problem that they learned about after the Lion Air crash. And that update has to go through certification by the FAA. And when the government shut down, the FAA was unable to process that update. What we don't know is if Boeing has finished the update, if at the time of the government shutdown, Boeing had finished the update and was just waiting for government certification. It's increasingly looking like Boeing is still working on the update. And if that's the case, then the government shutdown probably had nothing to do with it.
Okay, and I was just wondering on how that whole timeline went and whether we can attribute all those deaths to Trump or not.
Yeah, you'd have to ask, the engineers at Boeing, and they're very much not talking right now. So it's a good question, but we don't know the answer to it. Steve, thank you for the call. Cheryl in Philadelphia. Hey, Cheryl, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Yeah. Hey, Tom. First of all, what you posited at the beginning, I agree. I've been thinking all along that the Mueller investigation being put up on a pedestal like that there's going to be some way that
it was a huge mistake. Tom Steyer was absolutely right. We should have started impeachment hearings as soon as we discovered that there were crimes.
And by the way, Tom Steyer, a woman who just called and asked about impeachment and then it's dead. I just got an email from Tom Steyer's organization because I did sign, his pledge, 2 years ago?
Right. Yep, me too.
For his appeal for impeachment co-signers. They're asking people to contact, Majority Whip, Representative Jim Clyburn, contact him ASAP and urge impeachment.
Right.
I think whatever comes out in the Mueller investigation, there will be enough and to go with impeachment. And I'll tell you, that fellow that called before then, I hope that you run with that, Tom, or somebody that runs op-eds.
Right.
When he said that about North Korea being the enemy, and he's been given comfort by Trump, never popped into my head before he said it.
Yeah.
There is a there there. That is something.
Yeah, I agree.
Run with that.
I absolutely agree, and particularly now that Trump's efforts have gone south. I mean, prior to this point, probably people would have been reluctant to go after Trump for that because, you know, hey, if you're being nice to your enemy during time of war, with the goal of ending the war, then, you know, that's not treason. But if now that, you know, this is all blown up and Trump is continuing to say nice things about Kim and, you know, et cetera, then yeah, it may well meet the dictionary definition or the legal definition.
Exactly. But before I go, the reason that I called, though, and I don't know if it was your show or what, but the Trump voting machines. Ivanka Trump got a patent for voting machines.
That's correct.
China, when she was supposed to have given up all her patents back last autumn.
Yeah.
That somebody needs to run with that.
Well, she doesn't draw paychecks, so she's not a government official, so this is not an emolument. But she's doing government business, but she's doing it with private email. I mean, this is worse than the Republicans' worst fears about Hillary Clinton. This is terrible. Cheryl, thank you. Welcome back. Mick in Santa Cruz. Hey, Mick, what's on your mind today?
Good morning.
Hey.
I'm glad that you're still vertical. I mean, I am as well, and now I'm on Vashon Island, no longer in Santa Cruz.
Oh, okay, cool. Be sure to tell Shira the next time you call in so she can update our database.
Oh, okay. I get around a lot, Tom, mainly because I'm keeping an eye on the houseless people.
Okay.
The thing I wanted to bring up is, do you have any current information on the children who are, in my opinion, their rights are not only not represented, but are being put through trauma that, as you know, with smaller kids, right, they experience failure to thrive.
Yes, and there's over 2,800 of these children who we know of have been stolen from their parents at the border who are still missing. And there's the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. This is from Daily Kos, a piece by Gabe Ortiz, who's just been all over this story for a long, long time. I encourage you to check out his writings at Daily Kos, DAILYKOS.com. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus leaders have called for a multi-agency meeting featuring top administration officials who carried out Trump's separation policy, writing in a letter that they've been unable to meet with some officials independently. Their answers have indicated the departments failed to communicate about this barbaric policy's implementation and only worsened an already horrific humanitarian disaster. So the Hispanic Caucus is on this. You know, they're trying to do something about this, but so far, don't know. We just, you know, we don't know what's going on, and this administration, they are in defiance of a federal court order that they reunite these children. That is like, you know, what, you know, almost 200 days now, and
yes,
and you know, and that covered. I think they're down to a couple of hundred kids that are covered by that particular court order. And this is a crime. I mean, this is a crime against the Constitution. It's a crime against the country. It's a crime against humanity. And I sure hope that that a number of people in this administration are held to account for it. But Mick, I don't have a specific update for you. I'm sorry. You may want to check with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, any of the members of the Hispanic Caucus. Annie in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Annie, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Thank you for accepting my call. The thing that's on my mind this morning is I often watch Free Speech TV and MSNBC and other stations that provide a lot of information about what's going on with the Trump administration and the laws that they're breaking. And my question is, I think it's really important that we are kept informed But also, in addition to informing us, I think as we get closer to the Mueller investigation being reported on or whatever, that there needs to be more of a focus on telling or devising what can be done once it happens, and maybe he's not indicted for anything, because there are a lot of people who are engaged, who are extremely frustrated and on the verge of maybe just saying, forget it, our voice doesn't matter. And then there are other people who maybe are on the fringes who would like to get engaged, but the reporting and what's going on is building it up to a point, showing up like a pattern of, okay, so what? They did the investigation. They found out what's wrong. It doesn't matter. So why should we vote? Why should we stay engaged? And I think more emphasis needs to be put on what can we do when this happens.
Yeah. Annie, just from looking at history, what Republicans have done in the past, the Democrats have failed to do, and I think it's disheartening to me, frankly, that the Democrats have failed to learn from this lesson. When they went after Bill Clinton, for example, and I'm guessing from being from Arkansas, you were paying attention during those times. When they went after Bill Clinton, it started out back when before he was even governor, he had invested $34,000 in a land deal along a river. It was Whitewater River, and it was supposed to be a subdivision, and it didn't work out, and all the investors lost their money, and so Clinton got screwed. I mean, he lost his money, but somehow the Republicans thought that was a crime, that whoever walked away with the money, might have been a friend of Clinton's, blah de blah. There's got to be a crime here. And so they started the investigation, and then they didn't find any crime. In fact, it exonerated him. So they rolled that investigation over into an investigation of Hillary Clinton and her time at Rose Law Agency. She must have committed some crime there. They couldn't find any crime there. So then they rolled that over. And each one of these were, basically impeachment investigations. They were talking impeachment each one of these times. Then they rolled that over into an investigation. She had fired some people in the travel office in the White House. And oh my God, she can't do that. Well, it turns out she could do that. And then, I went to, and then the Jennifer Flowers lawsuit came along, and let's get on that, and that led them to, Monica Lewinsky, which led them to their final impeachment. But the point is that they never let go. They started out with the premise that this guy, Bill Clinton, is so morally corrupt that he shouldn't be in the White House, and we're going to find a way to take him out. And the Democrats have not been doing that. And although the Republicans have been accusing the Democrats of doing that, because Republicans always accuse Democrats of doing what Republicans do whenever they have a chance. And frankly, I think that the Democrats should be doing that. They should be. Yeah. And hopefully these investigations that they're starting right now, frankly, I think that there's already enough stuff right on the ground. I mean, just the simple fact that Donald Trump broke the law, campaign finance violations, or he ordered Michael Cohen to break the law. Cohen's going to prison for 3 years for this. Trump should be too, because he ordered it to happen. He broke the law in order to win the White House by hiding his affairs with Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. That, in my opinion, is enough to impeach him over. And we've known that for a year.
Yes.
So, it's like, where are the Democrats? And, and the response has been, well, we're going to wait for the Mueller hearing or, a report to come out. Well, the Mueller report is on the edge of coming out. And increasingly, it's looking like there's not going to be any indictment of the president, because Mueller is operating in these Justice Department guidelines that say that you can't indict a sitting president. And Trump is going to use that. And now Bill Barr is saying, oh, and by the way, if they don't indict somebody, we're not going to release the information about other crimes that they might have committed because they weren't indicted. And that wouldn't be fair to somebody who's actually innocent or wasn't indicted. And Trump is not innocent. He's not being indicted, not because he didn't commit the crimes, but because these are the Justice Department guidelines, which is, enough to scramble all of our brains. I mean, this is crazy. But that's how, it really appears that it's going to play out. Annie, thank you so much for the call. Yeah, in answer to your question, how do we stay engaged? I think we just, this democracy, this country, our neighbors, our quality of life, our children, the world that they're going to inherit, all those things hinge on our staying politically engaged. So let's not give up here. There's still a long way to go on this. Annie, thank you for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Our book today is Mortal Republic, How Rome Fell into Tyranny by Edward J. Watts. This is from the first chapter, which I think is really more like an introduction. This book explains why Rome, still one of the longest-lived republics in world history, traded the liberty of political autonomy for the security of autocracy. It's written at a moment when modern readers need to be particularly aware of both the nature of the republics and the consequences of their failure. We live in a time of political crisis when the structures of republics as diverse as the United States, Venezuela, France, and Turkey are threatened. Many of these republics are the constitutional descendants of Rome, and as such, they have inherited both the tremendous structural strengths that allowed the Roman Republic to thrive for so long, and some of the same structural weaknesses that led eventually to its demise. This is particularly true of the United States, a nation whose basic constitutional structure was deliberately patterned on the idealized view of the Roman Republic presented by the 2nd century BC author Polybius. This conscious borrowing from Rome's model makes it vital for all of us to understand how Rome's republic worked, what it achieved, and why, after nearly 5 centuries, its citizens ultimately turned away from it and toward the autocracy of Augustus. No republic is eternal. It lives only as long as its citizens want it. And in both the 21st century AD and the 1st century BC, when a republic fails to work as intended, its citizens are capable of choosing the stability of autocratic rule over the chaos of a broken republic. When freedom leads to disorder and autocracy promises a functional and responsive government, even citizens of an established republic can become willing to set aside long-standing principled objections to the rule of one man and embrace its practical benefits. Rome offers a lesson about how citizens and leaders of a republic might avoid forcing their fellow citizens to make such a tortured choice. Rome shows that the basic, most important function of a republic is to create a political space that is governed by laws, fosters compromise, shares government responsibility among a group of representatives, and rewards good stewardship. Politics in such a republic should not be a zero-sum game. The politician who wins a political struggle may be honored, but one who loses should not be punished. The Roman Republic did not encourage its leaders to seek complete and total political victory. It was not designed to force one side to accept everything the other wanted. Instead, it offered tools that, like the American filibuster, served to keep the process of political negotiation going until a mutually agreeable compromise was found. This process worked very well in Rome for centuries, but it worked only because most Roman politicians accepted the laws and norms of the Roman Republic. They committed to working out their disputes in the political arena that the Republic established rather than through violence in the streets. Republican Rome succeeded in this more than perhaps any other state before or since. If the early and middle centuries of Rome's republic show how effective this system can be, the last century of the Roman Republic reveals the tremendous dangers that result when political leaders cynically misuse these consensus-building mechanisms to obstruct a republic's functions. Like politicians in modern republics, Romans could use vetoes to block votes on laws. They could claim the presence of unfavorable religious conditions to annul votes they disliked. And they could deploy other parliamentary tools to slow down or shut down the political process if it seemed to be moving too quickly toward an outcome that they disliked. When used as intended, these tools help promote negotiations and political compromises by preventing majorities from imposing solutions on minorities. But in Rome, as in our world, politicians could also employ such devices to prevent the republic from doing what its citizens needed. The widespread misuse of these tools offered the first signs of sickness in Rome's republic. Much more serious threats to republics appear when arguments between politicians spill out from the controlled environments of representative assemblies and degenerate into violent confrontations between ordinary people in the streets. Romans had avoided political violence for 3 centuries before a series of political murders rocked the republic in the 130s and 120s BC. Once mob violence infected Roman politics, however, the institutions of the republic quickly lost their ability to control the contexts and content of political disputes. Within a generation of the first political assassination in Rome, politicians had begun to arm their supporters and use the threat of violence to influence the votes of assemblies and the elections of magistrates. Within 2 generations, Rome fell into civil war. And 2 generations later, Augustus ruled as Roman emperor. When the Republic lost the ability to regulate the rewards given to political victors and the punishments inflicted on the losers of political conflicts, Roman politics became a zero-sum game in which the winner reaped massive rewards and the losers often paid with their lives. Above all else, the Roman Republic teaches the citizens of its modern descendants the incredible dangers that come along with condoning political obstruction and courting political violence. Roman history could not more clearly show that when citizens look away as their leaders engage in these corrosive behaviors, the Republic is in mortal danger. Unpunished political dysfunction prevents consensus and encourages violence. In Rome, it eventually led Romans to trade the Republic for the security of an autocracy. This is how a republic dies. Mortal republic.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. It's Anything Goes Friday, but I do want to get a couple of guests in here this hour. First off, Matt Taibbi. He's a contributing editor at Rolling Stone, author of 5 books, and including his latest, I Can't Breathe, The Killing on Bay Street. His website is Hate Incorporated, and his Twitter handle is mtaibbi, M-T-A-I-B-B-I, or at Rolling Stone also. Matt, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
It's always nice talking with you, Matt. And, you know, it's always great reading your stuff. You've got 2 articles here that I think are absolutely fascinating that I wanted to talk with you about. The first is the Scarlet Letter Club, how the people who lied us into the Iraq War are still around and still doing this kind of stuff. And the second is how to blow $700 billion. It's easier than you think about how we're being ripped off by the Defense Department. Where do you want to start?
Well, I'm gonna the Scarlet Letter Club piece is something that I'm doing as part of that serial book Hate Inc., and that's on taibbi.substack.com. And I have another piece on that coming out in Rolling Stone today, so we should probably start there. It's apropos.
There is kind of an intersection between the two, isn't there?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, no, I mean, one sort of fed the other, and that was the turning point actually in the whole history of what we were going to do with the defense budget. Because if people forget now, in the 90s, there was all this talk of a peace dividend, and, you know, we were no longer going to have to spend all this money because the Soviets were gone. And the Iraq War sent us back on a schedule of continually ascending defense budgets.
Right. So who brought us the Iraq War, and how do we prevent that from happening again? Being lied into a war by a president. It seems to me that we're about to be lied into a war in Venezuela and maybe Iran by Donald Trump as his re-election ploy, much as George W. Bush told his biographer, Keith Hertzwitz, in 1999 that if he became president, he was going to have a war with Iraq in order to get reelected.
Right. I mean, I think you could also characterize it as, we have regime change plans that have really the playbook that we started with in Iraq has repeated itself over and over again. In multiple arenas. Libya was one. It's now going on in Venezuela, obviously. The situation is a little more complicated in Syria, but the archetype for all this was the Iraq campaign. And what's so amazing about this, because I looked at it mainly from the standpoint of journalists and how we screwed up the story. A legend has emerged since then that the error was that we believed the intelligence that Saddam Hussein had WMDs, whereas we now know that WMDs was really an excuse that was kind of cooked up post factum in British-American negotiations to give the British political cover. The real reason is we just feel like regime change is the appropriate foreign policy for in the post-Soviet universe, and the entire press corps missed that. Well, and in fact, in a way, this was a repeat of the first Gulf War. I mean, when George Herbert Walker Bush, after April Gillespie, told Saddam Hussein that he could take back the 57th state, as I recall, which is what Kuwait used to be. It used to be a district of Iraq. Because they were slant drilling and stealing Iraq's oil, and Saddam was appropriately, I think, upset about that. As soon as he invaded Iraq, George Herbert Walker Bush was also looking at his own re-election in 1992 and said, okay, we'll have a war, but, it's not going to be a quagmire. I don't want to have a Vietnam kind of war here. We're just going to have a little war like Ronald Reagan had, and of course, Bush was the vice president for that little war with Grenada. But we've got to convince people that there's a reason for it. So they get this woman who is the daughter of a Kuwaiti diplomat to come in and lie about how the soldiers are throwing children in incubators, on the floors of hospitals, and everybody's horrified. And again, we buy a BS story that is not, the intelligence was not lying to us, I think, in either case. The politicians were lying to us. Isn't that pretty much what happened? I mean, a little bit of both. I think if you look back at the history of the Iraq War, you'll find that for instance, the British intelligence dossier, which was the first one that was released, was quite heavily edited. I mean, they originally came to the conclusion that Saddam could never build a bomb if there was a sanctions regime in place, that if there wasn't, it would be at least 5 years, and they originally edited it down to 1 year. Right. So yeah, there was some, what they called stovepiping going on, basically, where the higher officials like Bush and Cheney were sort of reaching down into the raw data and taking what they wanted. But the larger issue was it was the intellectual context within which all of this was sold. It was the idea that not only do they have weapons, but that containment doesn't work, that Iraq was an exceptional threat compared to countries like Libya and North Korea and Iran. All of these things were falsehoods that kind of had to be smoothed over in the initial planning, and the journalists bought it all wholesale, whereas the public initially reacted with quite appropriate skepticism. That's why there were millions of people on the street.
The largest demonstrations in the history of the planet were the anti-war demonstrations against going into Iraq in the winter of 2003, as I recall.
That's right. The February 15th, 2003 demonstration was the largest demonstration in history. Yeah. And what's amazing about that is that, I was one of the people marching that day.
Me too.
And nobody in the crowd was like, gee, I really don't think they have weapons of mass destruction. The tenor of those demonstrations was they're lying to us about everything. You know,
Right.
I mean, like the whole pretext is wrong. Like none of it makes sense.
Well, and there's another piece to this, Matt, that people were pointing out. I was actually on that day. Mark Crispin Miller and I were giving a speech in a church in Seattle, and we had like, you know, it seems like 1,000 people. And it was spilling out into the streets, and then of course it went out into the streets, and my recollection of that speech, you know, that I gave at the time, was that asking the question, why is it that we keep invading countries that have oil? You know, at that time, Iraq was, right. You know, Dick Cheney had just said Iraq had the second largest supply of oil in the world. Now we know that, well, and Libya has a massive supply of oil, so we went and we bombed the crap out of Libya and decapitated Gaddafi. And now we're learning that the single largest reserve of oil on Earth, it's not the sweet crude that we prefer, but is in Venezuela, apparently.
Right.
And
right.
so, gee, it's not just that we keep overthrowing governments, it's that we keep overthrowing governments that have, you know, within the top 3 amounts of oil on Earth.
Right. Yeah. And we're going into places that have economic / strategic importance to us. They're not telling us the real reason. I mean, there's a whole host of sort of interconnected financial and bureaucratic motives. The oil was certainly part of the picture, and the public, I think, quite rightly sniffed that out from the very beginning. You know, we all recognize that the explanations they were giving us for why we were going in didn't make any sense. And what's so amazing about that is, you know, the only news organization, only major one in America that didn't go along with this was the Knight Ridder News Service. So that tells you that, you know, we're journalists, our job is to be the tougher sell, right?
Yeah.
Like we're supposed to be the people who are harder to fool.
Oh, journalists are supposed to be professional skeptics. I mean, it's
exactly.
journalism 101, you know? So,
right,
but they failed to do that. Matt, we just have a couple of minutes left. So what do we do about all this? And what do we do about how badly we're getting ripped off by the Pentagon?
You know, it's really hard to say. I think the problem with both of these issues, and especially with the Pentagon, is that you're never going to fix the issue of foreign adventurism and the continually escalating defense budget until you deal with campaign finance, because what happens is the weapons manufacturers just dominate the appropriations and armed services committees, which means you can never threaten to withdraw their funding for anything. So I think that's thing number one. People need to realize that until they get that under control, nothing is going to change.
And thing number 2?
I mean, I think the thing number 2 that people talked about with the Pentagon, you know, when I did the story about how they failed their audit, they delayed for 30 years a congressionally mandated audit.
Right.
The Pentagon, you're never going to know exactly where all the money is until they have a modern, integrated accounting system that goes throughout the entire system. Right now, the military is divided into multiple fiefdoms. Each service has its own multiple accounting systems, and they're resisting sort of doing one big computerized accounting thing like you do in any big corporation.
Right.
I think they're 20 years away from doing that, which means that we have 20 more years of not knowing where the money goes.
And in the meantime, as you documented in your article, How to Blow $700 Billion, you've got defense contractors that are double billing just as a matter of business practice. Oh, yeah, hey, I got paid, not bad. And all kinds of stuff.
It's amazing. I talked to one Air Force accountant. He's like, and he's telling me, you know, people honestly, contractors will honestly, you know, by accident send an invoice to the Pentagon and just get paid. And, you know, then his take on it is word gets around. Like, if you know how to write an invoice to the Pentagon, the money's going to come. And there's a million ways to rip off the system. And they have like 200 people watching all this money. It's, you know, it's ridiculous. There's more enforcement officers in the NYPD. It's absurd.
Right, and this is nearly $1 trillion a year. It's $0.7 trillion a year. And then there's also the issue, and we just have 30 seconds, Matt, that about half the Pentagon's budget, I understand, has actually been privatized. It's going to private corporations to begin with. Well,
yeah, that's probably roughly about right. I mean, you know, the problem is the big five defense contractors, which I think is, off the top of my head, it's Lockheed Martin, Boeing. I forget what the other three are, but they take up something like 35% of the budget on their own.
Wow!
And because they have so much power, you can't withhold money from them because they just have so much control.
So it gets back to money in politics. The corporations are lobbying the politicians at the same time that the Pentagon is putting pressure on them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Amazing.
So it's an endless cycle.
Amazing. Another couple brilliant pieces here from one of the best reporters and writers out there, Matt Taibbi at Rolling Stone. You can check it out, The Scarlet Letter Club and How to Blow $700 Billion. Hang on just a second, Matt.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
That guy always steps on me. Matt, thanks so much for being with us today.
All right, thanks, Tom. Take care.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back with Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here. Justin in Lincoln, Nebraska. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind today?
Just climate change
Sure.
and the way people are responding to it. I mean, we had Mike Pence came out here because of all the flooding and everything, and the water that got into the wells and the stores. I mean, people were buying bottled water. It was just flying off the shelf. There was none there. And it's pretty crazy. And I'm listening to AM radio, and there's a bunch of conservatives on there, and they're saying, oh, well, this has nothing to do with man-made climate change. There's no such thing as man-made climate change. And I'm listening to that, and I can't believe it, and I just, it blows my mind. There were callers calling in saying, maybe there's something wrong with the sun, don't even think about the ozone layer, and I don't know. There was a bunch of engineers that called in, and they said all those bridges and, all the infrastructure, it needed to be replaced because it was too old. But they're all Republicans, so they don't want to fund that. I mean, like, nobody wanted to, replace that before or build a new one. Then nobody wanted to spend the money to do that. Now that it's gone, well, now it's time. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty strange stuff, Justin. It's pretty strange stuff. Do you see that? I mean, you live in Nebraska. You live in Lincoln, Nebraska. Do you see this changing, or do you think these people are genuinely brainwashed?
I think it's brainwash. It's just so normal. I mean, like you tune into the radio or something. You just the atmosphere. The people like this is the good old boy, place. I mean, everybody's just like, let's all agree on this thing. And if somebody says, hey, I don't necessarily think that that's right. I mean, there's all these scientists that say, oh no, those scientists are getting paid by George Soros and they're just a bunch of socialists and they're not telling the truth. Those teachers are brainwashing the children.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a hard time. You can't have conversations about politics and not even religion. I don't think. I wanted to throw this in there if I could. I just wanted to say I think tomorrow is International Atheist Day.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Happy Atheist Day.
Oh, yeah, it's tomorrow. Yeah. So I
in
think.
Advance.
But I just wanted to throw that out there. It's getting kind of weird, and I also think maybe we should put something about clean water in the Constitution, because that bottled water was not on the shelf and people were panicking. I mean, it was kind of weird, and we didn't really have that big of a problem here in Lincoln. I mean, but the water was still off the shelf, so I don't know.
Right.
Thanks for taking my call, though.
Yeah, you're welcome, Justin, and it might be and thank you for the call. It might be a good time for those people who live in the Midwest to get some water filters and sterilizers. I mean, we need to start thinking in terms of this is a new era. This is a new time that we live. If you live near a river, get ready for floods. Even if you don't live near a river, if you live on what formerly was a floodplain, even a 500-year, 1,000-year floodplain, get ready for floods. If you've got a big roof structure, get ready for the tornadoes. I mean, pardon me. The weather has gone nuts, and it's gone nuts for two reasons. Number one, the jet stream is falling apart because the Arctic is melting, and number two, because we've had a 1 full degree Celsius of global warming, the planet, which is 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, the atmosphere of the planet now holds 5 to 6% more moisture than it used to. Well, you get more moisture, you get bigger storms. It's just simple math. We'll be right back. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you, and it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Wayne in Chicago. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hey, how are you, Tom? Happy Friday to you.
Thank you. Back at you, Wayne.
Yes, yes, Tom, this is just a continuation of what we were talking about last week about 5G. And I remember you said that the science said that 5G could not penetrate the skin.
Well, it's less, I'm guessing it probably can, but it's less able to than the frequencies that are used for LTE and 4G and 3G.
No, well, actually, they actually assumed that it could not penetrate the skin, Tom. And
well, they're using those same frequencies right now for the scanners in airports, and the whole sales pitch from those is that it can't penetrate the skin, therefore it doesn't cause any harm. I still feel uncomfortable whenever I had to go through one of those machines.
Right, yeah. It was based on faulty intelligence about faulty assumption, faulty intelligence, that it doesn't penetrate the skin.
Okay.
But what they do is they completely ignore your nerves, your blood vessels, other structures in your body like bones that conduct electricity and carry radiation. So deep into the body also. So it's really going to be bad, Tom, especially for kids, like boys' reproductive systems especially. Like I say, man, I wish you would look into it much, much further because from what I'm seeing, Tom, it's going to be a complete disaster from what I'm seeing.
It's going to be a giant experiment, Wayne, for sure. I mean, there were concerns back 100 years ago, 60-cycle AC. This was when George Westinghouse was having the wars with Thomas Edison. And Edison was saying that we should be using direct current, DC, in our homes and all this kind of stuff. And Westinghouse was saying, no, we should use AC. And in fact, Thomas Edison invented the electric chair as a way of demonstrating how dangerous AC was and alternating current. But the thing about alternating current is that it produces electromagnetic fields that we're all bathed in right now. We're all sitting here, and it does penetrate the body. We're all sitting here completely surrounded by 60 hertz fields. And there was speculation back in the days that that was going to cause sickness. And in fact, there's still some people who think that that's one of the reasons why we have, some of the modern diseases and all that kind of thing. But it doesn't seem to have been, to be turning out. We'll see, Wayne. But, I agree with you. It's going to be a huge experiment. I just don't know that it's going to be that dangerous. But, it entirely could be, and I get it. Wayne, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 28 minutes past the hour. We're going to do an everything you know is wrong right after the break, and then we'll continue with Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with, first of all, Roger Thiel, and then your calls. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated,
quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You know how sometimes you know what you know, and sometimes you know what you don't know, and sometimes, like the Firesign Theater says, everything you know is wrong.
You know that you're wrong, but you fear you're right. You suspect you're out of sync. You think that you're out of your mind. Everything you know is wrong.
Is it possible to control your diet with your weight, ultimately, with your mind? Roger Thiel is with us. He's a historian. You may have seen him on the History Channel, excuse me. His latest book is called My Diet is Driving Me Crazy, which is also the name of his website, mydietisdrivingmecrazy.com. And the book is out there and available right now in all the normal books places. Roger, welcome back to the program.
Hey, great to be with you, Tom. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. We were on with you last time about your book about the Civil Air Patrol, which was absolutely fascinating. So, first of all, give me a quick summary of the book. I used, affirmation and kind of self-talk when I was in my early 20s to really, it really transformed my life, to convince myself, as it were, that I could become a successful business person and a successful author. How do you use this, internal conversation to make your diet work?
Okay, fine. Well, this is a new series of books which support your existing diet with courage, humor, and entertainment. Now, you can also turn to them in an emergency, so we even call this instant emotional support for your diet.
Wow.
Now, each volume has 10 very short stories and about 32 dieting affirmations, which we call insights. The stories are very special. Get this now, they place you in the mind of a dieter, usually when tempted by food, and you are there as the dieter finds the courage to overcome that temptation, and this feeling of winning rubs off on you. So it'll help you win your own daily diet battle. That's all new, just out since January.
Fascinating stuff. We're talking to Roger Thiel, his new book, My Diet is Driving Me Crazy, which is also the name of his website, which is fascinating. So what motivated you to write this book, Roger?
Yeah, well, last fall, I went to a large bookstore, not as usual to the history section, but quite frankly, to support my own diet. Now, every book in the section called Diet and Nutrition was worthwhile, but most of them felt so clinical or tedious, and there was very little about emotion and almost nothing that felt entertaining. But then I happened to walk by fiction and literature, and I remembered the deep emotions of storytelling. So I decided to write my own set of books, and they include the special dieting stories. They're only each half a page long, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Would you like to tell, you have a brief life-changing insight about Charles Dickens?
Oh, yes, Charles. What we do is we're coming here to story, and I'm about to, in fact, summarize one of our stories in the book. But to give people an idea of the power of story in our lives, 175 years ago, Charles Dickens was going to write a pamphlet for the people of England to say why the rich should help the poor at Christmas time. But he didn't do that. He decided he would turn it into a story, into fiction, and by writing A Christmas Carol, he multiplied the message a millionfold. It's become part of our culture. Everybody knows. But let's remember, this is because he used story.
Right, and I mean, story is powerful stuff. We are, I remember Robert McKee once saying that, you know, we actually are kind of biological story machines. That's one of the things that's kind of unique about humanity, is that we learn culture through story. We remember things best through story if we can insert data into stories, and we motivate ourselves with stories. We tell ourselves stories about who we are. We tell ourselves stories about the rest of the world. How do the stories that we tell ourselves about diet work or not work generally, Roger?
All right, fine. Well, most other diet books usually offer, you know, clinical instructions or lists of food, what you may feel when you go through the diet section in a bookstore.
Right.
We do the exact opposite. Most diet sources would expect you to use willpower or discipline or maybe your conscience, or maybe some technical advice, or maybe a sense of duty, but no, these stories give you the sudden emotional feeling of winning the diet game, and they're very short. So I'm going to summarize one. Our website even has under emergency support section, it has a subject index which lists stories for quick reference in different situations. So let's say you're concerned about food temptation in a supermarket. So then our subject index can refer you to a supermarket story which begins as a dieter returns a bag of candy to the shelf with pride. But then in the checkout line, the wall of candy bars is just so very tempting, and the dieter thinks, well, I just did something so good, maybe now I can. But then this dieter, while you are reading or listening, finds the courage to resist food temptation again. Right. And you feel the success on the level where it counts, the deep emotional level.
Right. It's remarkable stuff. The book is My Diet is Driving Me Crazy, which is also the name of the website, MyDietIsDrivingMeCrazy.com. The author is Roger Thiel. Roger, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Okay, very good. You bet.
Yeah, great talking with you. Roger is one of the most fascinating writers out there. He's done so much eclectic stuff. Anyhow, let's get back to Anything Goes Friday. Morris in Long Beach. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KPFK.
Hey. All right. I hope we got us some time, my brother. I just wanted to know what your definition of American exceptionalism was.
Oh, man. You know, I've got my this is what I think it really is definition and my kind of sarcastic definition. I mean, you know, the thing that is largely unique about the United States, although it wasn't, as you and I both well know, it wasn't appropriately executed at the time, is that it was a nation that was founded not on DNA, not on race or tribal identity, although, you know, ultimately that ended up being a large part of the case. It was, you know, of by and for white men. But nonetheless, the founding of the Republic was based on the ideas of the Enlightenment, based on, you know, everything from Thomas Hobbes to John Locke, and, you know, Thomas Jefferson was one of the great Enlightenment writers. And so I would say, you know, the fact that's the exceptional thing, that we were founded on an idea rather than you know, a lineage. You know, I would say that my sarcastic response to it is that we think that, you know, that we're superior to all other nations and all this kind of thing. And there's been a lot of nations since then that have said, no, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to found our nation on egalitarian ideas of you know, fairness and equality and things like that. And a lot of them have done a much better job than us now. What's your definition, Morris?
My definition is page 43 of a book written by a lady named Thom Hartmann, no relationship to the host. It's called The American Syndrome, Apocalypse, War, and Our Call to Greatness, page 43. Very, very outstanding. Also, I want to say, Professor, I've been listening to, while I was on hold, I've heard you read about 3 books. Alan Lichtman, I like his book, White Protestant Nation, The Rise of the Conservative Movement, particularly page 204. And Frederick Douglass once said that an oppressor ever finds in the character of the oppressed justification for the oppression. And I'd also like to refer you to the American Heritage Dictionary. Look up the word ethnic. Now, most of the time, words have more than one meaning in dictionaries. For example, ethnic means someone that is not a Christian, someone that is not a Jew, but someone that is a heathen. So there's an undercurrent, Professor, in our culture with regard to people, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I had no idea that was one of the definitions of ethnic.
Check out the American Heritage dictionary. I know this because I did a research paper in my systematic theology class. That's why I know
I believe you.
Love.
I believe you. I've never gotten bad information from you, Morris. So
I love you.
Well, thank you. Back at you. So you think that American exceptionalism has turned into, and I think you could argue that it was from the founding of the Republic, whether it was the Monroe Doctrine or whether it was the genocide of the Native Americans, or whether it was the Trail of Tears with Andrew Jackson or whatever, that America's real exceptionalism is that we have become an empire based on basically war and domination of other countries. If that's your point, I would not disagree with that, but I would say that really doesn't make us exceptional. A whole bunch of empires before us did the same thing: the French, the British, the Spanish, the Dutch, the Greeks, and the Romans.
They all had one thing in common. Anytime that people feel that they're God's chosen people, that also means that they're God's chosen race, and boy, does that create problems for everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? But read page 43. I think she articulates it pretty good.
Okay.
Better than I could.
Okay. You want to?
Thank you.
Thank you, Morris. Good to hear from you. Magnus in Vinalhaven, Maine?
It's Vinyl Haven.
Vinyl Haven. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you're still doing God's work, Tom.
Well, thank you.
I'll give you a bumper sticker first. It ain't class warfare because thieves got no class.
Okay.
And I like to call President Trump, and it should stick because he does it every day, President Projector.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm an Icelander originally, and I know for a fact that there's a bus in Reykjavik that for the last couple decades, and it's a Mercedes. Oh, they fixed up a diesel engine to take hydrogen, and it's been working fine as kind. So it's not really all that new technology, and it can be, if they can do it, we can do it.
Yep. Yep.
And there's one more little thing about Iceland, the healthcare system, which is we don't have to pay or worry about that, which is helpful with health anyway. But here in this country, when they're making policies, and policies means it's intentional, it's manslaughter.
Yeah.
It's manslaughter. That's what. It's nothing else. If people die because these guys need to make money, then that's all it is.
Yeah, it is certainly what it's become. Magnus, thank you. Well said. And nice to hear from an Icelander who loves the healthcare system in Iceland. It's remarkable how uninformed the average American is. It really and truly is. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday. Actually, we're going to check in with Talk Media News. No, we're not. We're going to do that in the next hour. We'll be back with your calls. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Maura in Linwood, Washington. Hey, Maura, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi. I watch you every day that you're on.
Well, thank you.
In fact, we could be related. I'm half Norwegian and half United Kingdom.
Well, we probably are. Norway's a fairly small country.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, but what I want you to recharge your battery. I don't know if you've ever been to Timberline Lodge, or whether you've driven the old Columbia River Highway. They were both built when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. The workmanship is magnificent.
Timberline is the lodge that is on Mount Hood, right?
Yes, it is.
Yes, Louise and I have been there. We've been there.
Okay. Did you realize that it was built in 1936 during the time?
Yeah, they have a plaque. They have the whole description of how it was part of the WPA, as I recall.
You're right, yes, and the workmanship. You can see the love the men put into it. And have you gone up the old highway, the old Columbia River Highway, and gone to Vista House? The highway is lined with rock walls that were built during that time. And And Vista House is, you get up above the gorge, you know, you can see the whole gorge. And this wonderful building was built, I believe, at that time.
Yes,
too.
we've been there
And
too. In fact, I think that was built in the 20s, wasn't it? Wasn't that built a little earlier than that?
That might have been
because it was
Hill.
built by a
That
wealthy
might-
guy, as I recall.
I think it was Hill. I think his name was Hill, and he was a railroad man.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's,
So.
yeah. Oh, okay. Well, there's a lot of places to go in Oregon. I was
There
born
really
and
are.
raised there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been
and
to
thank you
Astoria?
for-
Have you been to the
Oh,
the
yes.
old Astor
Yes.
Tower in Astoria?
Yes,
Climb up to the top.
I climbed it. Yeah.
Oh, it
yeah.
is. Astoria
yeah.
is just an amazing town.
Yeah,
Just an
well, it's a
amazing town.
wonderful state, and I think you're in God's country, and you deserve it.
I agree.
And,
Not that I deserve
here-
it, but I think it's God's country.
No,
Maura.
but I know it is, and I miss it. I'm in Washington because I need to be near my children now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wanted to tell you that thank you for putting Mount Hood out there. My grandma was 12 years old when she came from Norway to Minnesota, and she married my grandpa, who was also a full-blood Norwegian. And they went to a little town called Scotts Mills. They had 2 or 3 children by that time, and they went to Scotts Mills, Oregon, which is still, that little town is there. But and they were going to work in the mines to get ore out of them, iron ore. Well, that petered out, so they built a lumber mill instead on the little river there, and they lived up on a hill. And she missed Norway, and Mount Hood was her mountain.
Yeah.
And I think about my grandma every time I see your program and your mountain.
Okay.
And it's and I just feel like I'm a kindred soul of yours, and I learned so much.
Well, thank you,
from
Maura, and I appreciate the call. And I got to tell you, whenever I'm guessing that a lot of people don't realize that you can literally be driving down the street in Portland, and you can see Mount Hood. I mean, you can just see Mount Hood. In fact, some days you can see Mount St. Helens, on a clear day. This is just such an amazing city and such an amazing part of the world. Maura, thank you so much for the call, and it's fascinating. It's nice to meet somebody who's probably a relative. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. Welcome back. Fritz in Palm Desert, California. Hey, Fritz, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, it just occurs to me that the 25th Amendment allows the president to step aside temporarily. And I think that the argument that the president is too busy is precluded by that amendment when he can just step aside. But, of course, that would leave the real possibility that President Pence would pardon him.
Right.
Still.
Well, and not only that, the problem with
against it.
Right, the 25th Amendment was really designed. I mean, it was in the wake of Woodrow Wilson having had a stroke, Franklin Roosevelt having had a stroke and ultimately died from it, and then John Kennedy's assassination. It was, what do we do with a genuinely disabled president? I don't think it anticipates a psychotic president or a narcissistic president or a sociopathic president. And because you have to begin the 25th Amendment in order to start the process, it requires the vice president and a majority of the members of the cabinet. And
no, I'm not talking, Tom, I'm not talking about removing him. I'm talking about him facing criminal charges, stepping aside temporarily to defend himself in a criminal case.
Okay, but see, the 25th Amendment requires that they say that he's not able to perform his duties of office.
No. He could do it voluntarily.
Oh, well, he could do it voluntarily any time. He doesn't need the 25th Amendment.
Right. And therefore, this argument that he's too busy or he can't defend himself is precluded by the 25th Amendment, which allows him to temporarily step aside.
Sure. I get your argument, Fritz, and I don't disagree with it. I think the fact that Trump is spending more than half his days now watching Fox News and tweeting, and that's on the work days, and that he spent more time on his golf courses than, you know, certainly than President Obama did in 8 years. He's spent more time in golf courses in 2 years. Should tell us that that advice from the Justice Department that the president is so vitally busy concerned with affairs of state that he shouldn't be pestered or bothered by something like a criminal investigation or an indictment is BS. But that's what William Barr, who is the Attorney General, who covered up the crimes of Reagan and Bush when he was the Attorney General under Bush the Elder, that's what Bill Barr is saying. That's the position he's going to take. There's nothing we can do about it, to the best of my knowledge, other than just yell and scream loudly and show up in huge numbers in 2020 at the polls. But Fritz, I totally get your logic. Thanks for the call. Tim, in Beaverton, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind?
Yeah, you know, yesterday I was listening to your program, or watching, and I watch Free Speech TV every day. You do a great job, Tom, to begin with. I just wanted to comment.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. It's one of the few options that people that have a progressive base can actually learn something and communicate. It's scary, you know, based on what's happening in this country.
Yeah.
But you were talking about these mass shootings, you know, these mass shootings. Basically, that's part of the Republican ideology now. Whenever something like that happens, you know that Fox News, the NRA, and the Republican hierarchy are behind closed doors popping the champagne corks, because all that does is shore up their white nationalist Second Amendment base. There's no question about it.
Sure. And sometimes they come right out and say it. Sharon Engel said this about Harry Reid, as I recall, or maybe it was somebody else she was running against. I thought she was running against Harry Reid. And then Donald Trump said the same thing about Hillary Clinton, that there would be a Second Amendment solution, which is code for somebody's going to kill somebody.
Isn't that scary?
I think it's profoundly scary, and I think it's twisted. I mean, it's just twisted in a way that is such a distortion of the fundamental values of this country, or any country, frankly, humanity.
You know, I have 2 degrees in history. We aren't learning from history is what we're doing. The subjective nature of education is taking a beating in classrooms right now. You know, everybody wants to push buttons, basically. And then one little simple comment about Trump. You know, I mean, it's hard for me to even say that he's president. That's how despicable this whole situation is. But what he does is, I think he incorporates the lunacy and the viciousness of Dick Cheney and the stupidity of Sarah Palin. Those are the two common features that I think that incorporate the Trump presidency. Right?
Yeah, tragically. And then he has surrounded himself with some very, very efficient thieves, basically. You know, he's got, you know, I think one of the most corrupt cabinets in the history of the United States, too. Tim, I want to get a couple more calls in here before the hour's out. Thank you for your call. Charles in Murray, Kentucky. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Well, Tom, last Wednesday you made a quick comment that solidified my understanding of why the evangelicals are so enthralled with Trump. I was raised in a Baptist family. My church was a Baptist family. And we all had very special things we looked at to direct us. We looked at God first, then Christ, and right below them was our pastor who stood in front of us and preached us all day long. Mm-hmm. And we were intent on following what was there. Luckily, I had some great teachers at school that taught me to think. Mm. That seems to be what they're trying to get rid of now with our educational system.
Sure.
But, Tom, we have this thing got into us from childhood of having a fearless, very strong dictatorial type leader. And I feel this is why the evangelicals today are flocking to Trump.
Yeah, I think what you referred to that I said last week was that I believe that most evangelicals, or at least many, I think it's frankly most evangelicals who follow Trump, are not doing so out of religious conviction, and they're not even necessarily doing it because they were told to by their leaders, although there's a piece of that, but it's that they are authoritarian followers. So if their leaders tell them to do something, they do it. But even more than that, Trump is out there playing Big Daddy. He's saying that he is the authoritarian leader, and so people who are just kind of inclined to be authoritarian followers are like, oh, cool, I'll follow him. I mean, essentially that's what you're saying, is it not, Charles?
He's their version of God today, and you know, they just follow him. Whatever he says, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
He was right when he said he could stand out in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and nobody do anything about it.
No, he was bragging. He was not exaggerating. And Michael Cohen pointed to that in his testimony before Congress, that, you know, when Trump said that, he was dead serious. He was bragging. He was not making a joke. And you know, we need to take this stuff seriously. We need to take it very seriously. And the evangelical support. I mean, you know, this in part. Thank you, Charles, for the call. I think that part of what Trump is doing with regard to Israel, moving the capital to Jerusalem now, you know, recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli land. A lot of this has to do not so much with his sucking up to Bibi Netanyahu and helping his friend Bibi get reelected, although there's a big chunk of that, but also with satisfying the Christian evangelicals who want the world to end in a nuclear war that starts in Israel. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's you know, there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is In Putin's Footsteps, Searching for the Soul of an Empire Across Russia's 11 Time Zones by Nina Khrushcheva and Jeffrey Taylor. This is from the introduction titled In Putin's Footsteps. On New Year's Eve 1999, journalists in the Russian president's press pool had a feeling that things were going to change. They were right. The feeble and aging Boris Yeltsin, who could barely board a plane or stand for a 15-minute press conference, was about to deliver his end-of-the-year address in which he resigned and ceded power to his prime minister and hand-picked successor, Vladimir Putin. Once head of the Federal Security Service, the FSB, the post-communist democratic version of the dreaded KGB, Putin was indeed an unusual choice, having served as the head of the government for only a few months. But the 48-year-old ex-spy, who had become the youngest Kremlin leader since the Soviet Union's founders, Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, had a quiet energy that seemed boundless as the geographic expanses contained within Russia's 11 time zones. After taking over from Yeltsin as acting president on the first day of the new millennium, and after winning by a landslide presidential elections 3 months later, Putin, in the year to come, held over a dozen press conferences and traveled to almost 24 countries and at least a quarter of Russia's 89 regions, which are spread out over 11 time zones. Altogether, he was seen in public and on television more often than Yeltsin during most of his 8-year presidency. Suddenly, the press had something to report. The news stories were no longer those of Yeltsin's Russia, which was perceived, both at home and abroad, as weak, insignificant, and a corrupt boogeyman reeling from its Cold War defeat. These were stories of an enigmatic young technocrat tirelessly crisscrossing the country and meeting with workers, farmers, and cultural figures, attending theater galas and factory openings. All that uplifting travel, Russia was starving for the Kremlin's attention, connected Putin to ordinary people, and gave him the idea of delivering a rousing New Year's Eve televised address to the nation. Standing before the Kremlin's Spassky Tower just before the giant bells rang in the year 2001, under starry winter skies in front of a large snow-dusted Christmas tree, he pledged to counter the negativity of the post-Soviet decade and set the country on a new positive course. And this he did. In his address, the ardent young leader looked both charming and in charge when he spoke of Russia's great future, heroic past, and enduring spirit. Putin had often appeared in a reserved technocrat, but soon he would demonstrate a talent for finding opportunities to impress the heartland. He knew the best way to get to people's hearts, showing them that his priority was returning Russia to the world stage as a major power of formidable dimensions. Originally, he had an even bolder plan for his New Year's address, and he'd run it by journalists in his press pool during one of his trips around Russia. Without a hint of doubt in his voice, Putin told them that, quote, "Russia is an enormous country, a great country. We need to remember that our strength is our size. What if I were to travel through Russia's limitless land in one night, through all of its 11 time zones, stopping in each one at midnight local time to record a New Year's message to show our nation's greatness, our richness, the diversity of our mother Russia, our unity, and our worth?" Even though Russia's time zones are exaggerated in number, there should be only 7, according to generally accepted geographic markers of Greenwich Mean Time. It's a 24-hour cycle, also called UTC. Maintaining them is not only a political matter, it is reflective of the national identity, state power, and international influence. Russia has 11 time zones, more than any other country, and that, as Russians would have it, bespeaks its status in a way no one can deny. Often the time that appears on a nation's iconic clock, Big Ben in the United Kingdom, for example, or those daunting dials on the Spassky Tower in Russia's case, is a subtle way of representing where power lies. In Russia, every time zone is first referred to in relation to MSK, Moscow Standard Time, with UTC only following. Moreover, many countries don't even adhere to the 24-hour GMT UTC's neat meridians. China's huge landmass should straddle 5 different time zones, yet operates according to just one. Inhabitants of Western China, if they follow their clocks, have dark mornings and light evenings, but nobody doubts that only the Beijing time matters. When Hugo Chavez became president of Venezuela in 1999, he created a new time zone that would set Venezuela 30 minutes apart from neighboring countries. That was his way of letting the world know that Venezuela was striking out on its own. But Putin's idea of showcasing his country's temporal and geographic diversity in just one night was certainly unique, and it accorded with his plans to return Russia to its lost great power status. It also sprung from what Putin knew Russians expect of their leader, something close to godlike status. Keen on creating a leader's image steeped in tradition, history, and mythology, often associated with the uniqueness of the Russian soul, spiritual endurance, persevering patience, belief in miracles and material sacrifice. He wanted to be seen as the Dead Moroz, the Granddad Frost, the Russian Santa Claus, bearing gifts of renewed national importance and self-confidence. Capitalizing on Russia's size, 6,000 miles from east to west, Putin hoped to begin restoring his country's grandeur, once Tsarist, then Soviet, and now Russian. The idea was bold and beautiful, but unfortunately unrealizable. And it goes on from there. The book In Putin's Footsteps by Nina Khrushcheva and Jeffrey Taylor.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
At least for this one, presented a certain kind of hope.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, and this is so wild. I just have to share this with you real quickly, and then we'll continue picking up your phone calls here as we've been doing for the last couple of hours. By the way, at 20 minutes past the hour, Talk Media News is going to drop by and update us on what's going on in the world. They've moved back an hour. But in any case, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is just wicked smart. I mean, this is a young woman who really, she understands America, she understands American politics, she understands the law, she is just wicked smart. She is one extraordinary woman. And therefore, the men over on Fox News are like, well, that's not possible, right? And not only that, she's Hispanic. I mean, you know, come on, she smart? Are you seriously? So on Fox and Friends, Steve Doocy has this conversation with Mike Huckabee, Sarah's dad, you know, the hustler who pretended to run for president in order to, you know, raise his profile for his TV show. So anyhow, Steve Doocy says, somebody is writing her questions. And he's talking about when she was, you know, asking Michael Cohen questions. He says, I saw the questions at Michael Cohen, and I saw the questions at Wilbur Ross, and there are some forces behind her. I think there's a story here. And Mike Huckabee goes, well, very well could be. There have been some allegations she was almost like the Manchurian candidate, recruited, prepared, you know? Yeah, right. You know, it's such a sad, frankly, tragic insight into the minds of these men over at Fox News. You know, I suppose I don't even need to elaborate. Let's just get to your phone calls here. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Well, I was wanting to talk about how Trump he wants to get rid of WTTW, Channel 11, Window to the World. He wants to cut America off from the rest of the world, so I guess we won't see the other political situations or whatever that's going on. I mean, the cut to stop WTTW would be, I mean, to me, a great loss, because if I don't have cable or nothing, and WTTW is the one station that I get outside of the United States, that speaks about what's going on in other parts of the world.
I don't know anything about this station, Maine. Is this a Chicago TV station?
Well, yeah, it's a public TV station.
Oh, okay.
And another thing I wanted to speak on, someone finally spoke on getting rid of the Electoral College. Just lady, a politician, someone finally said the words.
Yep.
We need to get rid of the Electoral College. We've been talking about this for the longest. And
yeah, we haven't had a Republican president elected by a majority of the voters since I think Bush Sr., maybe Reagan. I mean, you know, it's been 20, 30 years since we've had a Republican president who was legitimately elected. And frankly, I don't think that Reagan was legitimately elected. I don't think Nixon was. I think they both committed treason to win the White House, but that's a whole nother thing. And yeah, the Electoral College, it's a vestige of slavery. It was a gift to the slave states that Madison came up with in order to, make them go along with being part of the new USA. And it gave them a little more power and a little more vote, because it was, the whole premise of the Electoral College, even though it's a vote for instead of for the House of Representatives, it was a vote for the presidency, but it was still based on the Three-Fifths Compromise. It was still based on the, all the slaves being counted, three-fifths of the slaves being counted toward the vote. And, that's why the Electoral College in large part happened. It's an institution left over from slavery, just like the Second Amendment is, and, just like three-fifths was. I mean, that was taken out of the Constitution, or blown out of the Constitution by the Civil War and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But it's time, I agree with you, it's time to take down the Electoral College. And we are, I think, 98 electoral votes away from doing away with this by having the states, I think it's fairvote.org, by having the states join and say, if the majority of the country, if the national popular vote goes to a particular candidate, then all of our electoral votes will go to that candidate. And once that happens, there will no longer be an Electoral College. And the only thing that's preventing it is a bunch of Republican-red states that refuse to sign on with this thing. But most of the Democratic states, I think all of the Democratic states, Colorado, I believe, was the most recent one that just joined this program, which took it down below 100 votes still to get, right? So step by step, Maine, step by step. Thanks for the call. Matt in Austin, Texas. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Well, I wanted to talk about a couple of things, Tom. I'm past 80 years old, and I have seen fear and greed just go insane lately during this presidency. And then I think about, man, this is what has governed man and controlled him since the beginning of time. And that is that somebody who is greedy can get other people fearful, and then they can gain from it.
Yeah.
And I don't know anyone more fear-pushing than this current president. And I don't understand that people do not stand up against it. He does speeches, and MSNBC and CNN play and talk about him ad nauseum for the entire hour that they're on. And I have written, and I said, why don't you just take a couple of things that he says, put them on at the top of the show, let your group of talking heads talk about it for 5 minutes, and then get on to the news.
Yeah, I would like to see the whole group of talking heads thing go away, frankly. What is happening here, Matt, is that that reality TV and reality radio, well, really reality TV. Reality TV is very cheap to produce. Reality TV came out of the writers' strike back a couple of decades ago, and what they have discovered on the TV side, because people are anxious to be guests on TV. They don't have to pay these people, right? And if they do become, quote, contributors, or some other word that means that they've signed an exclusive agreement with a particular network, then typically they're paid between $500 and $2,500 every time they show up on TV, which is chump change for these networks, that are paying their anchors $5, $10, $20 million. So it's just a super cheap way to fill a whole lot of time, because it's much more expensive to have news bureaus around the world than actually do news reporting. And it just makes me crazy every time I see one of these panels thinking, this is we're just burning through time so that we can sell advertising. And it's the wrong way to program, frankly.
I think that Michelle Wolf was dead on during the correspondence dinner when she looked out and said, "Oh, you've never been happier, have you?" to the left-wing reporters, because you're making more money than you've ever. And it's just greed. And the idea that these people that are talking ad nauseum about the fact that Trump is no good are doing nothing but putting him on. He's the most insane egomaniac I have ever seen in my 80 years, or 65 years since I've been paying attention.
Yeah.
And the fact that they don't recognize and stop it.
Yeah.
So I wish other people, I wrote a letter. Of course, I got nothing back, but I wish other people, if more and more people would write and say, get this guy off the air, to both MSNBC and CNN. That would be great.
These television networks, Les Moonves famously said during his investor call, Donald Trump may be bad for America, but he's great for CBS. Keep it up, Donald. We're making money hand over fist. And they gave him $2 billion worth of free publicity leading up to the election of 2016. And it looks to me like they are doing it all over again. They've already started, and it's spectacle. Trump is spectacle, and in this, if it bleeds, it leads era of so-called news. Now, spectacle is the #1 product that they're selling, and so he provides it. They go with it, and I'm with you, Matt. And I've written op-eds about. In fact, I wrote an op-ed specifically about this conversation we're having about 3 or 4 months ago, and I was frankly surprised how far it didn't go. I thought it would stir up some controversy. Matt, thanks for the call, and keep spreading the good word. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In about 4 minutes, we're going to check in with Talk Media News, find out what's going on in the world today, and in the meantime, it's Anything Goes Friday. And I'm wrong about Talk Media News. He will be on 30 minutes from now, exactly a half hour from this moment. Carrie in New Windsor, New York. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind today?
Hello, happy Women's History Month.
There you go. Back at you, Carrie.
Hey, I'm just let me get somewhere quieter for a second. Some multitasking. I've been so busy, I haven't been able to listen to your show almost all month. So, anyway, I have a, Women's History Month fact to share and a question.
Okay.
The fact is that women have not been allowed to vote for 100 years yet. We got the right to vote in 1920. Right. And who knows if we really still are, technically allowed to vote. I know brown-skinned people got the right to vote 50 years earlier in 1870. They didn't really get to vote, but they got the right to vote.
And it wasn't people, it was just men. Yes.
Exactly, just men. Men of color got the right to vote in 1870 and women in 1920. So with those deballed voting machines, I don't see a woman becoming president for another 50 years, I guess. I guess after, let's see, 2008 was Obama. So whatever, I can't really do the math right now exactly what 50 years from then, like the next real election will be or whatever. But yeah, so, and then my question is, I remember you guys, I did get to listen on International Women's Day, and there was a mention of it because a couple of your staff members, you had said, were debating all day as to whether or not it was called, well, let me see, March 8th, what is it, International Women's Day versus International Working Women's Day.
Right. It has been both by different groups.
Yeah. So I remember calling in last year being like, Happy International Working Women's Day. And so I have just been kind of programmed, because of this other radio station that I listen to, that's what they call it. But I've since figured out that I guess the socialist people, the Answer Coalition, all those guys, called it, put in the word worker. But I prefer, just because it's shorter.
Well, what's remarkable, Carrie, is how many of our holidays started out as very different things. May Day was celebrating workers. It was the International Workers' Day. The Harriet Beecher Stowe, if I'm remembering correctly, the author of, it's not the Star-Spangled Banner, it's America the Beautiful, I think. One or the other. In any case, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this poem about how, we women will no longer send our children off to fight in your wars. And she was the founder of Mother's Day, and it was Mother's Day for peace. It was an anti-war day. And now it's turned into a greeting card holiday, and we've completely forgotten about Harriet. And, we've got numerous holidays that really started out celebrating average working people or celebrating women or celebrating peace. And now they've been sanitized and turned into basically, opportunities to have a lesson plan in an elementary school. And that's pretty much it.
So what do you think we could do different so we could get a woman president sooner? Because, clearly I remember last time I called in, you were like, well, we almost got Hillary. But, again, with those deballed voting machines,
I think we have a really good chance this time, if not the presidency, the vice presidency. And, you've got some very well-qualified women on the Democratic side right now. And, in fact, I think all of them are very well-qualified. I think some of them have much better chances than others, but we've got an extraordinary field. So I'm hopeful that it's coming, Carrie, because, frankly, I think women govern better than men. Back, Thom Hartmann here with you. Anything Goes Friday. Luke Vargas will be with us in 30 minutes. My apologies for giving you the wrong time on the Talk Media News thing. Tom in Seal Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Well, I'd just like to remind people that we're all bozos on this bus.
Yes, you at the Firesign Theater.
Yes. I was calling because I'd like religious believers to recognize, at least intellectually, that they're probably wrong. The most popular religion worldwide is Christianity, but only about a third of the population are Christians. So that means 2/3 of the population is believing something.
Of the world?
Of the world. If we assume that the largest population group has it right, then 2/3 of the people have it wrong. Now, if we look at just the U.S., where nearly 3/4 of the people claim to be Christians, that lumps together, Protestants, Catholics, Mormons. So I can't.
Sure. What's your point, Tom? Where are you going with this?
Well, all three of those can't be right. So
sure. Well, there's one exception here that I think you're missing, and that is, you know, people, frankly, like me, who claim a religion. I call myself a Christian because I love the Bible. I grew up with the Bible. When I engage in Christian ritual, I feel good. I believe that Jesus was, you know, a brilliant prophet who said really important things. He was the original socialist and you know, a great role model in many ways. And Matthew 25 has been in many parts of my life kind of a template for my life. And yet, at the same time, intellectually, I know that it's almost, I would say it's a certainty that in my mind, and I'm not saying that anybody who disagrees with me is wrong. I'm simply saying for myself that the idea that he was born of a virgin, you know, that's something that goes back to Zoroastrianism. That was kind of inserted into Christianity. The idea that he rose from the dead, again, that goes back, you know, to ancient old religions, and I think was inserted into Christianity. So, you know, most Christian churches would throw me out and say I wasn't a Christian because I'm not buying 100% of their doxology and of their theology. But I still call myself a Christian. And I think that there's a lot of people like me out there who pray every day, who have a deep sense of spirituality. I do both. And who have had religious experiences in their lives that convince them that there's something very real and something very big out there that is much bigger than all of us, that is the intelligence that is the entire universe, and that we're some little tiny speck of. And I've absolutely had those experiences on multiple occasions in my life. And yet, I don't fit into any of those neat little categories, Tom.
Well, my point is that whatever your religious beliefs are, and personally, I believe that the world would be a much better place if people followed the teachings of Jesus. I don't have to believe he was a god to say that.
Yeah, my point.
But most people have to be wrong mathematically, and to be basing things like governance on what has to be, by most people, a wrong belief doesn't make any sense to me. I understand that some people get, you know, a lot of comfort from it, and I have no problem with that.
Well, this is why the founders twice in our Constitution wrote into the Constitution that we don't have a state religion, that there is you know, to paraphrase Jefferson, a letter that Jefferson wrote much later, or maybe it was Madison, a wall of separation between church and state. And that there shall be no religious test for office. I mean, we were not created as a Christian country. When Jefferson wrote the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, John Adams edited it along with Ben Franklin, although Franklin came a few days later. And you could see this over at the National Archives, I believe. In the first iteration of that editing, Jefferson had written the laws of nature's God, right? And because he was a deist, he really believed that nature was a reflection of the divinity that created everything. He believed that something created the universe and then stepped back and let the laws of nature run everything from that point forward. And John Adams was a fundamentalist Christian. He was very conservative. And one, you know, and a terrible president as a consequence of it. And he scratched that out and he wrote in the Christian God. And then Jefferson gets it back and he scratches that out again and writes in nature's God. I mean, this is a debate that literally goes back to the founding of the Republic. And it was decided. It was decided unambiguously by the people who founded this country. And we've had this movement in the United States. It reared its ugly head in the 1830s. It did it again in the 1880s with these huge kind of, you know, end of times movements and waves of evangelical Christianity. And then again in the 1920s, and then again in the 1970s and the 1980s, although the one in the 70s and 80s morphed into this cult thing of the mega churches and the Jim Bakkers and the Jimmy Swaggarts and all these guys who you know, developed these massive cult followings, and then, you know, showed us all the Jerry Falwells and you know, showed us all that they have feet of clay just like all the rest of us human beings here, but it's still rolling. And now you got Mike Pompeo, you know, openly making policy based on his belief that the world has to end in Israel.
Well, I don't know how you decide which religion to believe, and how do you know that the one that you pick isn't like Heaven's Gate with the 38 suicides waiting for the UFO?
And that's why I encourage a healthy skepticism, but do what feels right. Tom, I don't have an answer to that one. Tom, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to us there in Seal Beach, California. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
TGIF, Juma Mubarak, Shabbat Shalom. It's Friday. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday. Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time.
Indeed, to see or hear Douglas became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglas's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglas was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. You know how Devin Nunes is suing now the Twitter account Devin Nunes' cow? It turns out there's a whole story here about Devin Nunes' cow, or about his family farm. Ryan Lizza wrote an extraordinary piece. It's 14 pages long. I just printed it out over at Esquire magazine, esquire.com, titled Devin Nunes' family farm is hiding a politically explosive secret. It says, Representative Devin Nunes is head of the House Intelligence Committee, one of President Trump's biggest defenders. For years, he's spun himself as a straight talker whose no BS values are rooted in his family's California dairy farm. So why did his parents and brother cover their tracks after quietly moving the farm to Iowa? Are they hiding something politically explosive? On the ground in Iowa, Esquire searched for the truth and discovered a lot of paranoia and hypocrisy. Just a little heads up. Angie in Grants Pass, Oregon. Hey, Angie, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
I'd like to add to your last Sermon on the Mount, practicing staying present and gratitude are very powerful, and I don't care to give them a name. It's not important to me. I know they work.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you on the subject of statute of limitations and crimes and all. A couple of weeks ago, you were talking about kidnapping and child abuse, and the caller said trafficking. And I would add conspiracy. What about those? Do they have a statute of limitations?
I don't know.
Children being separated from their parents?
It'll vary from state to state, Angie, and kidnapping is a federal felony. I don't know about any of the other things that you've talked about. Kidnapping and transporting a person across the state line is a federal felony. And clearly the Trump administration has done that. But I'm not the person to ask that question.
Things, is that, they discuss things. Is that conspiracy? I mean, this isn't an accident, what they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it would be conspiracy. It absolutely would. I think that I doubt that, frankly, I frankly doubt that anybody in this administration is going to be held to account in this political cycle. But I think it's entirely possible that if they're not held to account in the next political cycle, then history will hold them to account. We're going to look back on this, particularly as these children grow up and start telling their stories as adults. We're going to look back on this the way that we look back on the Japanese internment camps, or worse, you know, the way we look back on slavery, and just be humiliated by the fact that this was done by our own country. This was done in some cases by our own ancestors. It's just a terrible, terrible crime that these guys are doing. Angie, thank you for the call. Sarah in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Sarah, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Remember several years ago, before cellular phone had cameras on it, there was this term, suicide by cop?
Sure.
And I was wondering the other day if what's going on now with the shooting of minority people was actually back then, but because we didn't have cameras to document anything, nothing has changed.
Oh, I absolutely believe that, Sarah. I think that, in fact, I think that the cell phone cameras have been the disruptive technology that has probably slowed down the rate at which cops are killing unarmed black people, although certainly it has not come to a halt.
Yeah, because, and I was thinking, remember, you hear all the time, suicide by cop. He wanted us to kill him. Well, now we see with the cameras that might not necessarily have been what's going on. Even with the beatings of people when they're in the jail and they're handcuffed to a chair, or they handcuffed to the back and they end up shooting themselves in the mouth. Thank God for the camera phones.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, sometimes it's just logic. I mean, there was that one guy in the jail, I think it was Florida, I could be wrong, a couple of years ago, who apparently in jail shot himself twice, right? I mean, really, I mean, it's like, come on, at least try a credible lie. Sarah, thank you. Thank you. Spot on. Don in Weldon, California. Don, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. It's wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you, Don.
I was listening to you talk to the gentleman about church and how people kind of follow leaders just merely because they are leaders. And it reminded me of something I heard on the radio, I think, yesterday, that Trump is concerned that colleges are not letting conservative people, voice their opinions, and that colleges are making liberal people just because that's what they're told in college. What I think is true is that colleges give kids a chance to think for themselves, and when you give people a chance to think for themselves, they think liberally with open minds.
Yeah, they call themselves liberals. Yeah, I agree.
Right. Yeah. So I think that just the mere fact of going to college gives a person a chance to think for themselves.
It's almost like it's like an evolutionary process, Don. You start out being a conservative, believing in hierarchy and a patriarchy and authority and all the mythology of Fox News. And then you go off to college and you discover that there's this whole world, and there's history, and there's philosophy and critical thinking, and you become a liberal, and then you graduate with a degree that allows you to make a lot of money. And as your net worth starts going into 7 and 8 figures, and you start being worth millions or tens of millions of dollars, suddenly you become a conservative again, because hey, the conservatives are all about keeping the taxes down. It's
that's very true.
It's just very strange. It's just very strange. Don, thanks.
Could I add one more little thing?
Sure.
I'm a hospice nurse in Southern California, and we take care of people, obviously, who are dying.
That is God's work.
Sometimes we take care of people. Thank you. We take care of people who come out of the hospital very sick, and then they tend to get better because they're getting so much care, and they see nurses a couple times a week, and so we catch things before they get worse. I think we need a lot more home health. We could take care of people, especially elderly people that can't get to the doctor, just the simplest things that we could catch early just by seeing people at home. And we could save a lot of money, and people could have far better lives. You
don't just save more money, you also prevent the spread of hospital-acquired infections like C. diff and some of those other things. My very best friend went in for heart ablation surgery, where they stop the atrial fibrillation by burning a little bit of the heart away. And they do this by running an electrode up through your vein, or your artery, rather, from your leg, the inside of your leg. And the surgeon screwed it up, and he lost like 8 units of blood, and his leg swelled up to twice the normal size and ended up in the hospital. Long story. I mean, this went on for about a week and a half. They punched 2 holes in his artery or his vein. Finally, they got it fixed, and finally a plastic surgeon got in to close the wound because it got infected. He went home. It got infected. He came back. It's just this insane thing. And they were going to send him home, but he's on this, IV antibiotics. And they were like, well, we've got to have a nurse come to your house to administer the antibiotics. And they couldn't. He had to stay in the hospital for an extra 3 days because they couldn't find a nurse.
Right.
Because he's in New York City and there's some kind of shortage or something, or they took time to organize it or whatever. That's crazy. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
Home care is the best care. And like I said, you're not exposed to these hospital-acquired infections, which are getting really, really nasty out there. Don, thanks so much for the call, and good on you for being a hospice worker. That is such, my father went through this, and it is just so good. It is such good stuff. Thank you, Don. Arthur in Malden, Massachusetts. Hey, Arthur, what's up?
Hello, Tom. As a veteran of the Iraq War, I first want to say thank you for your public service, keeping me informed.
Thank you for your service to your country, Arthur. Our country.
I'm a little nervous. I wanted to recommend a movie that I saw on Netflix. It's incredible, called 22 July.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
I wanted to mention it to you because last week there was the New Zealand shooting that happened with the white supremacist killing 50 people. Mm-hmm. So this story is a true story, directed by Paul Greengrass of The Bourne Ultimatum and United 93 about the 9/11 plane attacks. Mm-hmm. And this movie is about a white supremacist who shoots up Norway. This is a true story that
Anders Breivik?
Back in 2011. Sorry?
Anders Breivik?
It might be. I'm not.
Yeah. He's the guy who killed 70 people in Norway, because they were liberals.
Right. Because they were, I think, students on an island.
Yep. It was a summer camp that was put on by a political organization that was politically progressive.
Exactly. It goes into the police, the actual shooting first, then the police catching the shooter, the aftermath, how the judicial system handles the shooter, and his lawyer's perspective.
Yeah, it wasn't just the shooter, too. He tried to blow up one of the government buildings as well, didn't he?
Yes, well, he did blow up a building. That's the start of the movie, at least. Yeah. So it takes the point of view of also one of the victims hurt by the shooting. Yeah. The captured shooter's perspective is very scary. It's listening to him espouse this white supremacist doctrine makes the skin crawl.
And he's the guy who inspired the guy in New Zealand.
Well, that may be true.
No, I'm telling you, it is true. He left a 1,000-page manifesto, Breivik, and the guy in New Zealand quotes it and references it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie, and I recommend it to you.
July 22, is that the name again, Arthur?
22 July.
22 July. On Netflix, did you say?
Yes. Netflix.
Okay, I'll check it out. Arthur, thank you for the call, and thanks for the suggestion, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes and change past the hour. We are going to, in 4 minutes, check in with Luke Vargas with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. And so stick around. Interesting day we're having here.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stay tuned. In 4 minutes, Luke Vargas will be here from New York City with Talk Media News. Richard in Naples, Florida, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Well, good afternoon, Tom. It's such a good thing that I have you to watch on TV. It's heartwarming.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate your being there. Please stay on. Listen, the reason I'm calling is that since it's open Friday, and I guess I don't have to have listened to all the rest of the stuff this morning, I had to do some work. I listened to The View this morning, and they had Peter Buttigieg, mayor of Indianapolis, I think it is.
South Bend.
Who's
Yeah.
Yeah, South Bend, Indiana. That's right. And I was very encouraged by him.
He's a
just brought
genius.
back to me,
this guy. He is amazing.
He Rhodes Scholar, but it just made me feel like I felt when I first tuned in to Barack Obama. I really feel like we have a sensible person here who could carry us forward. And one of his messages was that instead of calling it democratic socialism, which raises all kinds of emotions in people unnecessarily, why not democratic democracy?
Yeah.
Why not? But the basic idea, because a little late, earlier on there, I heard you speaking, a gentleman was speaking about Jesus's philosophy, and certainly we, I think, all progressives see the value in that. But his idea is that he's a strong religious person, but he sees himself as informed by his religion, but not wanting to say that everybody has to be like him. Yep. He wants to listen to all folks. It's his idea that he would be president of the entire nation. And I'm remembering what you talked about yesterday, reading from a book, that when you have a 6 children in school and 4 of them vote to play tag and the other 2 vote to play, say, hide and seek, you don't necessarily have to simply say, well, it's going to be one or the other. You have to be aware of other people's views and work with them, and that's what I think he is doing, and I think he has the best chance of beating Trump, mostly because his view is that you don't take on this job by way of looking at it as a way to topple Trump.
Yeah. No, he's very clear that he's about fixing America, and this is not only is he brilliant and young. I mean, he's still in his 30s, as I recall, but exactly. He's also a married gay man. He is the first. This is the first openly gay candidate to be a nominee for president of the United States. Actually, he's not a nominee, but to even be in a primary for president of the United States from either party. And that in and of itself is groundbreaking. But I would vote for Pete Buttigieg in a minute. This is not an endorsement. But if he was the nominee of my party, I would walk over hot coals for him.
And there was a lady just a little while ago that talked about when are we going to have a first woman president. And your response was, yes, it's about time. You think that women rule, or not rule, but women govern better than men generally. And, we possibly have to look at that. And a gay person, I would think, has views that might be, more broad.
Well, being a minority, he has to have had a life experience that informs him about the need for compassion. And yes, I am concerned about men generally governing because they're typically testosterone poisoned. Richard, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So let's check in with Luke Vargas and find out what's going on in the world today. This report from Talk Media News brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, the new book from Ellen Ratner. And Luke, I'm sorry, I haven't yet opened your, there it is right there. Let me just, okay, President Trump has tweeted, oh, I have a question for you. He's now withdrawing new sanctions on North Korea. Now, Sarah Sanders just came out and said, well, he still likes Kim. The definition of treason is giving aid and comfort to an enemy during time of war. To the best of my knowledge, there's only one country that we're actually in a state of war with right now, and that's North Korea. I'm scratching my head here, Luke. What's going on?
This has been really difficult to understand. Yesterday, we were getting invitations from the National Security Council to come to the Executive Office building so that they could explain to reporters just how crucial it was that North Korea, these two Chinese shipping companies who have been helping North Korea evade sanctions, get punished for this. Treasury really thought this was crucial to closing loopholes in the sanctions regime and maintaining pressure on North Korea. Only for several hours ago, Trump to tweet, yeah, it was announced yesterday by the Treasury, blah, 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 but I am ordering actually that we withdraw these additional sanctions, end quote. I mean, it was just like out of nowhere, he basically undid this, raising tons of questions about whether there's a big rupture within the administration, that the Treasury Department is doing things without the okay of the White House, or if Trump just had a change of heart, and if so, what prompted it? Did he get some sort of message back from North Korea after the sanctions were sort of teased, and he wants to change his mind here? Or is this just an absolute mess, and there's just no policy whatsoever? I would point out these, you know, it's just odd to begin with, because what the U.S. is alleging here, if you look at the statistical background, is that there's massive violations of the sanctions regime. For instance, there were 263 tanker ships full of petroleum that illegally docked at North Korean ports last year after collecting oil on the high seas. This is illegal. It's a violation of the U.S. and international sanctions on North Korea. And yet our way of patching this up is two tiny slap-on-the-wrist sanctions against Chinese international shipping companies that don't really have money overseas or aren't going to be affected by a travel ban. So there's just sort of a
it raises an interesting question. You know,
lack of clarity on so many fronts. Yeah.
If Trump is going easy on Putin because either A, Putin's got the goods on him and he's afraid of him, or B, which I think is more likely, frankly, he wants to build a Trump Tower in Moscow and it'll be worth, to quote Michael Cohen, hundreds of millions of dollars to Trump. But, you know, he's got a secondary agenda there that is driving foreign policy with regard to Russia. Is it possible that he has a secondary agenda that's driving policy with regard to North Korea? Now, that wouldn't be that he wants to build a Trump Tower there, but Kim runs one of the world's most efficient hacking operations. And it's entirely possible that Kim knows, you know, all the secrets about Trump, knows everything, and has been able to, you know, pull all this stuff out. Maybe in one of his sit-downs with Trump, he just said, hey, Donald, wouldn't it be a shame if people learned about X, Y, or Z? I mean, is it possible that Kim is blackmailing Donald?
I think it would be unwise for me to wander into too much speculation there. Okay. But I will say that I clearly think we need to consider North Korea sanctions in the broader context of the China trade talks. I mean, that really is where, if your administration is trying to pretend that you're closing up sanctions gaps that China is exploiting, and the scale of those sanctions violations is massive in this case, right. And yet your professed big response is pretty weak sanctions against entities that aren't really going to be negatively affected here, and that China's probably going to interpret as a kind of gesture in the grand scheme of things, that, hey, you could have made a big deal out of this, and instead you sort of you tried to score some political points, but you didn't really cause us any harm. I wonder, I think we have to see linkages between an easing of pressure on North Korea, despite all of their violations of the sanctions, and possibly trying to appease China or induce them to a good trade deal. But and I would just point out, it's just, I think, sort of all the more galling to people who are trying to, properly triage what we should be focusing on. The fact that we've got North Korea violating sanctions and here being let off the hook and being told that the U.S. president likes their oppressive leader, and on the same day the U.S. tightening new sanctions on Iran, even as it comes out that there is no evidence they're working towards nuclear weapons. I just think the contradictions there are difficult to stomach and just really difficult to make sense of.
Amen. Meanwhile, Trump has announced that we're recognizing Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights now as basically acquired territory. Sort of the way we acquired Texas or Arizona from Mexico during the Mexican-American War. This was supposed to be something that we would negotiate with, wasn't this?
Yeah, it doesn't change any of the realities on the ground, but I think it dispenses with any notion of non-interference in these Israeli elections. We're really trying to push Bibi over the top and distract from new scandals that keep erupting domestically. So
yeah, and it may well work. It may well work.
Yeah.
Luke Vargas, Chief Foreign Correspondent for Talk Media News. Check out his 2-minute podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. Thanks so much for being with us this week. I hope you have a wonderful, safe, extraordinary weekend. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy requires all of us. That includes you. So please, get out there, get active, do something, right? Help wake people up. Tag, you're it. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!